We're going to look after my niece starting today. What did you say? I said we're looking after my niece. Here, you're a stay-at-home wife, so you can handle it. All right. When my husband came home, I saw him holding a baby, his niece. She was quiet, and even though she was only 5 months old, she didn't drink much milk. I asked him how my sister-in-law was taking care of her, and he just told me I had to figure it out myself. Later, I called my mother-in-law to get more information. What she told me was something I wasn't expecting. I see. So that's what it is. I finally understood what was happening. I'm his wife, and he's taking advantage of me. I'll show him what I can do. My name is Emily. Before I married my husband Tom, I worked as a daycare teacher. After we got married, I quit my job and became a stay-at-home wife. Tom works at a startup and leaves for work every morning at 7 o'clock a.m. I thought that if possible, I would keep working and save money until we had kids. But 1 month before our wedding, Tom suddenly said, "Emily, I'm sorry if this is selfish, but if we get married, will you quit your job and become a stay-at-home wife?" What? Why? So you can focus on the house. If you're comfortable at home, I'll be able to work harder. I think we should both keep working until we have kids. I know, but I really want you to stay at home. I'll give you enough money each month. What do you think? He was so serious, there was no room for me to say no. I've always liked doing housework, so I agreed. That's how I ended up becoming a full-time stay-at-home wife after getting married. 2 years later, for the second month in a row, I didn't get the money from Tom. I decided to talk to him about it during dinner. Hey, I need to pay the rent soon, and I'm planning to go to the hair salon tomorrow. Can I have the money for this month? Oh, about that. Can you manage with half the amount this time? Why? My salary went down a bit, so I can only give you less for now. How long will this last? I'm not sure, just hold on a bit longer. It should go back to normal soon. Okay. Since then, I had to dip into my savings more often. One day, I started feeling uncomfortable with Tom's behavior. At first, I didn't think much of it, but lately Tom had been coming home much later than usual. He used to be home by 7 p.m., but now he was always coming back after 11 p.m. Then one day, he didn't come home until after midnight. I was so worried I called him, but he didn't answer. He had never been like this before. I started to feel like something was wrong. If he doesn't come home by tomorrow morning, I'll call the police. Just as I was thinking that, I heard the door open. I ran to the door to make sure Tom was okay, but then I saw something shocking. What? What is that baby? Tom was holding a tiny baby. She looked about 6 months old. I had no idea why he was holding a baby, and I was completely confused. Then Tom said something unbelievable. "This is my niece. She's my sister's baby. We're going to take care of her from now on." What? What did you just say? We're taking care of her here. Her name is Lily. She's 5 months old, I think. I'm counting on you, Emily. Wait, I don't understand. My husband suddenly came home with a 5-month-old baby. He said she's his sister's child, but I thought his sister was living in California with her husband. I had no idea what was going on, so I asked him to explain. Please explain. I thought your sister was in California because of her husband's job. Well, I heard they got divorced. Divorced? Really? They seemed so happy at our wedding, and now they're getting divorced when the baby is just 5 months old. Don't ask me. I'm not them. Anyway, my sister got divorced and moved back here for work. She needs us to take care of Lily until she gets her job situation stable. Oh my gosh, is this for real? Wait, what about your mom? Couldn't your sister stay with your parents? Tom hesitated, looking upset and stammering before he said something unexpected. Actually, my sister hasn't told her parents about the divorce yet. She said she'll tell them when she gets settled. What? That doesn't mean we have to take care of the baby, right? I know, but my sister is going through a tough time. Besides, she left Lily with us for a reason. What do you mean? You were a daycare teacher, right? So you know how to take care of babies. And since you're a stay-at-home wife, you have free time during the day. What's that supposed to mean? You have free time because you're a stay-at-home wife? I don't get it. You know what I mean. Come on, Emily, here. My husband pushed me to take the baby and walked into the house. I thought we were going to discuss what to do, but he just started drinking beer like nothing was wrong. Tom, are you kidding me? I raised my voice, and my niece, Lily, started crying loudly. Tom didn't seem to help, so I asked him out of frustration, "Where are the diapers? She's crying. I'll change her and give her some milk." "What's that?" "I didn't bring anything." "Huh? You didn't bring any of her baby things from your sister?" "I don't think so." "Are you serious? Then what are we going to do with her?" "I don't know." Tom got upset and kept drinking his beer. I had no choice but to leave Lily with him and run to the 24-hour drugstore. I bought diapers, baby formula, bottles, and wipes. Her skin was so dry. I also grabbed some moisturizer. I quickly paid and ran home. I changed her diaper, fed her, and gave her a bath. She finally calmed down. I used to work as a daycare teacher, so I knew how to care for her. But I was still confused by the situation. It was already past midnight. While I was giving Lily a bath, Tom had already gone to bed. The next morning, when I saw Lily was asleep, I woke Tom up. "Hey Tom, wake up." "Huh? What is it?" "I was up late last night. I need more sleep." "Don't be silly, it's your day off. Lily needs some clothes. She doesn't have anything to wear." "I'll get them. Just watch her, okay?" "What? Why? It's getting colder. Why is she only wearing underwear?" "Don't tell me. My sister gave her to me like that." "That's irresponsible. Anyway, I'll get her something fast. Just don't let her out of your sight." I told Tom, who was still in bed, and rushed to the nearby mall. I bought clothes and toys for Lily, then hurried back home. As I opened the front door, I heard Lily crying. I rushed into the living room and saw her crying hysterically on the sofa. Tom was standing next to her, playing with his phone, watching a video without paying attention to her. "What are you doing, Tom?" She started crying so much. "Why did you leave her alone? Don't you care enough to hold her or stop watching your video? Why are you so upset? It's not a big deal. Now that you're home, just give her some milk." "Huh? Don't make me do everything." "I've been paying for everything out of my savings, not just today, but for the past few months. Will you give me that money back?" "Well, that's enough. This situation is ridiculous. I'm going to talk to your sister directly. Give me her contact information. I'm a former child care worker, but there are things I don't know, like how much milk she drinks, how much sleep she needs, and what she likes. If I'm going to take care of Lily, I want to treat her properly, and to do that, I need to know how her mother cared for her." But when I asked my husband for her contact information, he refused. He got angry and yelled at me. "Why do you have to ask my sister? Think for yourself." "What? Are you serious? Lily is in a place she's not used to. It's only fair to ask her mom how she lived." "I don't care about that. Regular feedings and diaper changes, that's all you need to know. Just take care of her until my sister comes to pick her up." "Seriously, what the hell, Tom?" Tom sighed loudly, got up from the sofa, grabbed his wallet and phone, and walked out. Unbelievable. So irresponsible. What is he thinking when he was the one who brought her here? I need to take care of Lily in a safe, secure environment. I decided to reach out to my mother-in-law for help. Although Tom had said she didn't know about his sister's divorce, I couldn't worry about that right now. After taking care of Lily and putting her to bed, I called my mother-in-law. "Hello? Hi, it's me, Emily." "Oh, hi, Emily. It's been a while." Lily, who had been sleeping, cried softly in response to my voice. My mother-in-law heard it and sounded surprised. "Emily, I just heard a baby cry." "I'm sorry, that's actually why I'm calling. I have some questions about Lily. Can you give me your daughter's contact information?" "My daughter? What does she have to do with the baby?" "What?" Because Lily is her child. That's what Tom said when he brought her home." "No, that can't be true. My daughter has a girl, but she's already 3 years old, and my daughter's family is on an overseas trip." "What?" My mother-in-law's words confused me. They didn't match what Tom had told me. "Oh, is your daughter divorced?" When I asked the most important question, she sounded surprised and said no. "Divorced? No way. They just visited here last month. There's no way she's divorced." At that moment, everything Tom had said about Lily started to fall apart. I couldn't trust him anymore. My mother-in-law seemed to feel the same way and asked in a worried voice, "Emily, then Tom brought the baby with him, right? He told you it was his niece." "Oh my gosh. I know. I'm sorry. I think I need to investigate. I don't think the results will be good. I know, I heard you. I'll keep quiet until we know the truth. After talking to my mother-in-law, I quickly looked up a detective agency. I didn't have time to visit in person, so I found out I could request an investigation online. I immediately asked for a background check on Tom. For a few weeks, I tried to stay calm. My husband was always home after midnight, like he didn't want to be around me. One week, an investigator came to my house with the results of the background check. As I expected, my husband was having an affair. Every night after work, he would stop by his partner's house. The investigator also told me that Lily was probably the child of the affair. My husband had left her with me because he knew I was a daycare teacher and didn't want her to be disturbed. I couldn't stop being angry at my husband for being so selfish and horrible. I waited for him to come home that night, past midnight. When he came home, I confronted him. "Welcome home. Did you enjoy your time with your mistress?" "What? What do you mean, mistress?" "I know everything." "What?" I showed him pictures of the affair. He went pale and looked shocked. "When did you take those pictures?" "I called your mom for your sister's contact info. She told me something surprising. Your sister hasn't divorced, and she's abroad with her 3-year-old daughter." No. This is. "What? She's not divorced, and she doesn't have a 5-month-old daughter. Is Lily yours? You and the mistress?" "Wait, I'm being careful. She tricked me." He was making excuses like it wasn't his fault. "She came on to me. I was just having fun. It wasn't serious. I don't even know if Lily is mine." He begged me to forgive him. I felt disgusted and angry. "You've got to be kidding me. You don't know if she's yours? Get a DNA test or something. But even if she isn't, I won't forgive you. You cheated and betrayed me." "Emily, calm down." "No, you betrayed me, your mother, and your sister." "I'm sorry. Please calm down." "Why should I? You and your mistress don't understand responsibility." My husband kept apologizing with tears, but I couldn't forgive him. He had done the worst thing to me. It took a while, but I divorced him. I also demanded alimony from his mistress and got a lump sum payment. They ended up in debt because of it and started fighting a lot until they broke up. His mother and sister didn't help him at all. He lied and cheated on me, making me take care of the baby he had with another woman. No woman could forgive that. As for Lily, she was staying with her mother's parents. When I said goodbye to her, she smiled at me for the first time. Normally, I might have hated her, but I didn't. She was innocent. The cheater was the one to blame. Now I'm divorced and living alone, but sometimes I think about Lily. I hope that even though her parents aren't around, she grows up strong and able to handle life's challenges. That's all I can wish for her now. I've always believed that true character reveals itself in how people treat those they think can't benefit them. My name is Emma Miller, and this is how I learned just how right that belief was. Growing up, my parents taught me the value of hard work and humility. My father was a janitor at a prestigious tech company, and my mother cleaned houses for wealthy families. They worked themselves to the bone to give me an education, often going without so I could have what I needed. "Emma, sweetheart," my mother would say, her hands rough from years of scrubbing, "knowledge is the one thing nobody can take from you." Those words echoed in my mind as I worked my way through college, studying finance and computer science. By day, I attended classes. By night, I cleaned offices just like my father. But I had a secret that kept me going. I was developing a revolutionary financial algorithm that could predict market trends with unprecedented accuracy. During my final year, while most students were partying, I was perfecting my program. Then, one ordinary Tuesday morning, everything changed. My algorithm caught the attention of a major investment firm. They offered me $75 million for it, plus a position on their board. I accepted the deal but kept my wealth hidden. I continued living modestly, investing wisely, and growing my fortune quietly. That's when I met James. He literally ran into me at a small cafe where I was working on my laptop. Hot coffee splashed across the table, barely missing my computer. "Oh God, I'm so sorry," he exclaimed, frantically grabbing napkins. His genuine distress made me laugh. "It's okay," I assured him, helping to clean up. "I'm Emma." "James, please let me buy you another coffee. It's the least I can do." One coffee led to dinner, and dinner led to more. James was kind, funny, and refreshingly down to earth. He worked as a high school teacher, passionate about making a difference in his students' lives. When he proposed 6 months later, I said yes without hesitation. Then I met his family. Patricia, my mother-in-law, lived in a sprawling house in an upscale neighborhood. Her husband, Robert, had passed away years ago, leaving her a comfortable inheritance. From our first meeting, she made it clear I wasn't what she'd envisioned for her son. A cleaner's daughter, she said, eyeing me over her wine glass. How quaint. James, darling, I thought you were dating that lovely doctor's daughter, Caroline. Mom, James warned, but the tone was set. At every family gathering, Patricia found ways to remind me of my place. She'd ask me to help the catering staff, claiming I feel more comfortable in the kitchen. When James defended me, she'd laugh it off as just trying to make Emma feel at home. Her daughter, my sister-in-law Amanda, was cut from the same cloth. A successful real estate agent, she never missed an opportunity to flaunt her success or remind me of my humble beginnings. Emma, dear, she'd say with false sweetness, I have some clients looking for a cleaning service. Should I give them your mother's number? I took it all in stride, partly because I knew the truth about my wealth, but mostly because I wanted to see people's true colors. James would squeeze my hand under the table, whispering apologies for his family's behavior, but never truly standing up to them. What they didn't know was that I had plans of my own. I've been quietly buying properties throughout the city, including several in Patricia's prestigious neighborhood. The mansion next door to hers had been on the market for months, and through a series of shell companies, I acquired it for $12 million. The annual family reunion was approaching, a 3-day affair where relatives from across the country gathered at Patricia's house. This year, however, would be different. James, honey, Patricia announced at dinner a week before the reunion. I've arranged the guest rooms. You'll stay in your old room, of course. Emma can use the basement. We need the good rooms for family who actually contribute to our gatherings. James shifted uncomfortably. Mom, Emma's my wife. And as my daughter-in-law, she should be grateful for whatever accommodation she receives. Patricia cut in smoothly. Besides, with her background, she's probably used to much worse. I simply smiled and said, the basement will be fine, Patricia. If only she knew what was coming. The reunion began on a Friday. Cars filled Patricia's circular driveway as family members arrived. I helped carry luggage, serve drinks, and endured the usual snide comments about my background. That evening, as everyone settled into their luxurious guest rooms, I made my way to the basement with my small suitcase. The basement was cold and musty, with a narrow cot set up in the corner. As I sat on the creaking bed, I heard laughter floating down from above. Patricia's voice carried clearly through the vents. Can you believe she actually took the basement without complaint? I told James he should have married Caroline. At least she knows how to carry herself in proper society. More laughter followed. I checked my phone. One new message from my property manager. Everything is ready for tomorrow's inspection, Mrs. Miller. The mansion next door has been fully furnished according to your specifications. I smiled in the darkness. Tomorrow would certainly be interesting. Saturday morning dawned bright and clear. I woke early, my back aching from the basement cot, and made my way upstairs. The kitchen was already bustling with activity as Patricia directed the catering staff for the day's brunch. Oh, Emma. Good. Since you're up, make yourself useful and help Maria with the dishes, Patricia commanded, not even looking in my direction. And do try to stay out of sight when the guests arrive. We have some very important people coming today. I caught James' eye as he entered the kitchen. He looked pained but remained silent, reaching for his coffee. The familiar sting of his passive acceptance made me straighten my shoulders. Just a few more hours. Actually, I said calmly, checking my watch, I have an appointment this morning. Patricia's head snapped up. An appointment? During our family reunion? How incredibly rude. Now, Mom, James began weakly, but Amanda cut him off as she swept into the kitchen. Mother, the Hendersons just pulled up. You know, the ones who bought that gorgeous mansion next door. She smirked at me. They're my biggest clients this year. The sale was worth millions in commission. Patricia preened. Wonderful. Emma, before you leave for whatever menial task you have planned, at least make yourself useful and help serve the Moses. I smiled. I really must go. My real estate agent is waiting. Real estate agent? Amanda scoffed. What, are you looking at studio apartments in the bad part of town? The doorbell rang, and Patricia hurried to answer it, shooting me a warning look. I followed the group into the grand foyer, where a sophisticated woman in a sharp suit waited. "Good morning, Mrs. Miller," she said, smiling directly at me. "The mansion is ready for your final inspection." The room fell silent. Patricia's carefully crafted smile froze on her face. "There must be some mistake," she said with a forced laugh. "Emma isn't." "Emma Miller," I confirmed, stepping forward. "Owner of the mansion next door." Amanda's mimosa glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the marble floor. "That's impossible. I handled that sale." "Through my shell corporation, yes," I said pleasantly. "I believe your commission check was quite substantial." James stared at me, his coffee cup suspended halfway to his mouth. "Emma, what's going on?" "Perhaps we should all sit down," I suggested, gesturing to the living room. "I have quite a story to tell." Once everyone was seated, Patricia and Amanda perched on the edge of their seats like birds ready to take flight. I began. 7 years ago, I developed a financial algorithm that sold for $75 million, I said calmly. Since then, my investments have multiplied that many times over. The mansion next door is just one of many properties I own. "But you let us think," Patricia sputtered, "that I was a cleaning lady's daughter who married above her station." I finished. "Yes, I did. And you all showed me exactly who you are through how you treated someone you thought was beneath you." "This is absurd." Amanda stood up, her face flushed. "Mother, she's clearly lying." My real estate agent cleared her throat. "I can assure you, Mrs. Henderson, that Mrs. Miller's credentials are impeccable. In fact, she owns controlling interest in the development company that built this entire neighborhood." Patricia's face had gone from red to white. "The entire neighborhood?" "Including this house," I confirmed quietly. "I bought it last month when it was technically still under your late husband's estate. The paperwork was finalized yesterday." The silence that followed was deafening. James had sunk into his chair, his face a mask of shock and dawning realization. "You mean?" Patricia's voice trembled. "This isn't my house anymore." "It's mine," I said simply. "Just like the basement where you made me sleep last night." Amanda jumped up. "Mother, she can't do this. We'll fight it in court." "You're welcome to try," I replied. "My lawyers have ensured everything is perfectly legal. But right now, I'd like you both to leave my house." "Leave?" Patricia gasped. "But where will I go? This is my home." "Was your home," I corrected. "Don't worry, I've arranged for temporary accommodations for you. There's a modest apartment available in the building where my parents used to work as janitors. I hear the basement unit is particularly cozy." The family gathering had devolved into chaos. Relatives whispered among themselves, some looking shocked, others secretly pleased to see Patricia's pride take such a fall. James finally found his voice. "Emma, why didn't you tell me?" he asked quietly. I turned to face my husband. "Would it have made a difference? Would you have stood up to your mother's treatment of me if you'd known I was wealthy? Because if money is what it takes to earn basic respect in this family, then we have bigger problems than where I sleep." The real estate agent cleared her throat. "Mrs. Miller, shall we proceed with the inspection of your new property?" "Yes," I said, standing. "Patricia, I'll have my staff help you pack. You have until tomorrow evening to vacate the premises." As I walked toward the door, Patricia's voice rang out, suddenly honeyed and pleading. "Emma, dear, surely we can discuss this. We're family, after all." I paused at the doorway, turning back to face her. "Family? Let's talk about family, Patricia. Last Christmas, you seated me at the children's table and told everyone it was because I wouldn't know how to behave at the adults' dinner. Last month, you accidentally excluded me from James' birthday celebration. And just yesterday, you made me sleep in a basement because you said I wasn't good enough for a real room." I didn't mean," she stammered. "Yes, you did," I said firmly. "You meant every slight, every insult, every attempt to humiliate me. You showed me exactly who you are, Patricia. Now I'm showing you exactly who I am." The sound of my heels clicking on the marble floor echoed through the silent house as I walked out, head held high. Behind me, I could hear Patricia's sobs and Amanda's angry protests, but I didn't look back. The following weeks were a storm of activity and emotions. Patricia and Amanda moved out as required, though not without drama. They hired lawyers, of course, but as my legal team had predicted, every transaction was ironclad. I moved into the mansion next door, leaving James to decide his own path. The distance gave me time to think about our marriage and what it meant to build a life with someone who couldn't stand up for you. One evening, about a month after the revelation, my security team alerted me to a visitor. James stood at my front door, looking more disheveled than I'd ever seen him. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly. I led him to my home office, a warm room filled with family photos, including one of my parents on their 30th anniversary. James' eyes fixed on it as he sat down. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he began. "About everything. About us. I've also been seeing a therapist." I waited, letting him find his words. "I failed you, Emma, not just at the reunion, but every time I let my mother treat you like you were beneath us. I told myself I was keeping the peace, but really, I was just being a coward." "Yes, you were," I agreed softly. He winced but continued. "The thing is, I kept wondering why you didn't tell me about your success. Then I remembered last Thanksgiving when Mom made that comment about your father being just a janitor, and I laughed. I actually laughed." Tears formed in his eyes. "That's when you were going to tell me, wasn't it?" I nodded. "I had the papers in my bag. But watching you laugh at your own father-in-law, I realized that you were just like them." "I was," he admitted. "And that shame is mine to carry. But Emma, I want you to know what's happened since you left." He straightened in his chair. "I resigned from my teaching position at Brighton Prep." This surprised me. James had taught at the prestigious private school for years. "I took a job at Riverside High School instead," he continued. "It's in the neighborhood where you grew up. The kids there, they remind me of you. Brilliant, determined, just needing someone to believe in them. And your mother? I haven't spoken to her since she moved out. She and Amanda have been trying to rally the family against you, but it backfired." Cousin Sarah came forward about how Mom had treated her when she married beneath her station. Then Uncle Robert shared stories about her behavior toward his second wife. "It's like your courage in standing up to her gave others permission to speak their truth." I absorbed this information, noting the changes in James. He seemed more grounded, more present. "There's more," he said. "I've been volunteering at the community center where your mom used to work. Did you know they have a program teaching financial literacy to cleaning staff and janitors? I'm helping them expand it." "Why are you telling me all this, James?" "Because I want to earn back your respect," he said simply. "Not because you're wealthy, but because you're the same amazing woman who helped me grade papers until midnight and made soup when I was sick. I was too weak to deserve you before. I want to become someone who does." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Patricia. "Your mother's at the apartment building," I told James. "She's demanding to speak with me." "You don't have to go," he said quickly. "Actually, I think I do. I found Patricia in the basement apartment where she now lived." The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Her designer clothes looked out of place against the concrete walls. "Hello, Patricia." She turned, and I was struck by how different she looked. The carefully maintained facade had cracked, showing the insecure woman beneath. "Emma," she said, then stopped, seeming to struggle with words. Finally, she whispered, "I understand now." "Understand what?" "What it feels like, to be judged by where you live. To have people look down on you." Her hands trembled. "Yesterday, I couldn't get a restaurant reservation because of my new address. Me, I've been going there for 20 years. Feels awful, doesn't it?" She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I've been horrible. Not just to you, but to so many people. Living here, being treated the way I treated others, it's opened my eyes." "That was the point," I said quietly. She looked up sharply. "You mean, this wasn't just revenge? Revenge would have been making you homeless. This was about education." Patricia sank onto the small sofa. "I've lost everything. My home, my social standing, my son." "You haven't lost James," I corrected. "He's choosing to be his own man for the first time. Whether you lose him permanently depends on whether you can accept that change." "And you?" she asked hesitantly. "Have I lost you as a daughter-in-law?" I studied her carefully. "That depends on you too, Patricia. Real change takes more than a few weeks of humility." "Will you help me?" she asked softly. "I don't mean financially. I mean help me learn to be better." It was the first time I'd ever heard genuine vulnerability in her voice. 6 months later, I hosted a dinner party. Patricia was there, wearing a simple dress rather than her usual designer labels. She helped in the kitchen not because anyone asked her to, but because she wanted to. Amanda came too, having recently started volunteering at a women's shelter, a requirement I'd added to her lease when she asked to rent one of my properties. James and I were still working on our marriage, taking things day by day. He'd proven his commitment to change, not through grand gestures, but through consistent actions and unwavering support. As we sat down to dinner, I looked around the table. My parents were there, my father deep in conversation with James about the financial literacy program, which had expanded to 3 more community centers. My mother and Patricia were exchanging recipes, their previous class barriers dissolved. "Emma," Patricia said during dessert, "I wanted to thank you." "For what?" "For teaching me that true worth isn't about where you live or what you own. It's about how you treat people." She smiled sadly. "I just wish I'd learned that lesson sooner." Later that night, as James and I stood on our balcony overlooking the neighborhood, he asked, "Do you regret any of it?" I thought about the past year, the pain, the growth, the transformations. "No," I said finally. "Sometimes people need to lose everything to understand what really matters." He took my hand, and we stood in comfortable silence, watching the stars. The basement apartment where Patricia lived was visible from our vantage point, its lights glowing warmly in the darkness. It stood as a reminder that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the chance to become better than they were. My phone buzzed. A message from my investment team about another successful algorithm deployment. But for once, I didn't check it immediately. Some things were more valuable than money, and I was finally surrounded by people who understood that truth.
Poor people will rub off on you. Don't even sanitize. Some carry antiseptic for garlic because it's the dry season. It's unclear whether Wendy, my mother-in-law, carries it for that reason or another, but one thing is certain, her actions reek of malice. "Mom, let's go home," I said, trying to diffuse the tension. "Okay, I understand. Let's go," she replied, her tone distant. On the way home, Mary, my daughter, said something that sent a chill through the air. "So, your company's going to go bankrupt?" Her words struck like a thunderbolt, her anger cutting through the cool evening breeze. A life marked by love and loss. "My name is Sasha James. I turned 55 this year. I don't have a husband. My daughter, Maria, was born 25 years ago, and on that very day, I lost the love of my life. My husband, a company CEO, was always busy but never too busy to love me. He proposed despite my doubts about being a CEO's wife. I thought we could make it work, but fate had other plans. The day Mary was born, my husband rushed to the hospital to see us. He had recently undergone heart bypass surgery, and while it seemed successful, his heart gave out on the way. He never made it back. The delivery room, once filled with the joy of a new life, became a place of mourning. Despite my grief, I had to keep going. For Mary, raising her alone was an exhausting journey. When Mary was young, her preschool teacher reprimanded her for being unkind to a friend. I scolded her harshly, and though she tried to explain, she ended up in tears. Every day was a struggle, but over time, she matured, learning to communicate better. Being a single mother was challenging, and I often faced prejudice. Still, Mary and I made countless precious memories together. A daughter's new chapter. Mary graduated from college and recently turned 25. "Happy birthday, Mary," I said, presenting a homemade cake. "Wow, Mom, you made this? It's amazing." "Thank you," Mary beamed, the candlelight reflecting in her eyes. "This might be our last birthday celebration, just the two of us," I said, glancing at the engagement ring on her finger. "Next year, we'll celebrate with everyone." Mary had come home days earlier, her face glowing as she showed off the silver ring. "David proposed," she announced. Her joy reminded me of my own engagement day. Mary and David had been together since high school, weathering nearly a decade of challenges to reach this point. Watching her smile, I couldn't help but feel bittersweet. "It'll be lonely when she leaves," I muttered, staring at the flickering candle. Unexpectedly, tears welled up and rolled down my cheeks. "Mom, thank you for everything," Mary said, her voice steady. "Even after I get married, I'll always be your daughter." Welcoming David. David came to our home to formally ask for Mary's hand in marriage. "Sasha, thank you for looking after us for 10 years, he said earnestly. "I promise to make Mary happy. Please let me marry her." "What should I do?" I teased, breaking the tension. "Mom, stop," Mary laughed, her cheeks turning pink. We all chuckled, and the sadness of Mary leaving began to lift. Seeing them together, I knew her happiness lay with David. David was already like family, we had taken trips together, and his respect for tradition felt almost unnecessary. Still, I admired his sincerity. David, I said, Mary has always struggled with expressing her emotions. Please be patient with her. When things are difficult, talk them through. But if she does something like cheating, I smirked. Bring her to me immediately. Laughter filled the room, echoing in my heart. Meeting Wendy. David's mother, Wendy, ran her own company, which caused repeated delays for the family meeting. Mom, it's just hard to find a time since she's a CEO, Mary explained. I understand, I said, though I couldn't shake my unease. After several cancellations, Wendy finally set a date. Last Saturday of the month. Don't cancel again, Mary insisted, her tone sharper than usual. When the day of the meeting arrived, my uneasiness grew. I dressed in formal attire, anticipating that Wendy might criticize casual clothing. Mom, you don't have to dress so formally for this, Mary said, trying to reassure me. I just have a feeling Wendy would find fault if I didn't, I replied. We arrived at the restaurant early, waiting for David and Wendy. When they arrived, Wendy's presence immediately dominated the room. Her aura was polished, sharp, and intimidating. I'm Wendy, David's mother, she said curtly. Her movements were graceful, her tone commanding, and her gaze cut like a knife. Without waiting for pleasantries, she sighed and led the way inside. Sorry about my mom, David whispered apologetically. She's always been like this, even I find her difficult. It's okay, David, I said, forcing a smile. She seems like someone from another world, almost like nobility. At the word nobility, David's expression clouded, but he said nothing. Mom's already inside. Let's go, Mary urged. The atmosphere felt heavy as I followed them into a private dining room. Wendy was already seated in the place of honor, her posture perfect and deliberate. Every detail of her demeanor seemed calculated to make a statement. David, sit here, Mary, there, and you, by the door, Wendy instructed, gesturing coldly. It felt like she was subtly assigning me the lowest rank in the room. I've heard you have back problems, Wendy added with a thin smile. You'll need to be near the door in case you need the restroom, perhaps even a wheelchair. Her words were dripping with condescension. Thank you for the consideration, I said with a calm smile, but wouldn't it be better for you to sit by the door? You might need it more. Wendy's face hardened, clearly unused to being addressed in such a manner. No need to worry about me, thank you for your concern, she replied icily, her smile never reaching her eyes. The meal began in stiff silence, broken only by Wendy's smug remarks. Didn't your parents teach you the proper order to eat food? Wendy said, her tone dripping with superiority. You start with soup, then bread, followed by the main dish, and finally the side dishes. It's common sense, and basic manners. She proceeded to lecture us on the importance of this peculiar dining sequence, explaining that soup stimulates digestion. David smiled awkwardly, clearly accustomed to these rigid rules. But this wasn't how I had raised Mary. I had only taught her the basics: don't chew loudly, don't talk with your mouth full, and never walk around during meals. Wendy's elaborate etiquette seemed more suited for a royal banquet than everyday life. When Mary reached for the main dish first, Wendy's eyes flashed with disapproval. What Wendy is saying might be correct, I said, breaking the tense silence. But isn't the heart of manners about consideration for others? Criticizing someone's lack of manners is, in itself, poor manners. Wendy's face flushed with anger, her hands gripping the edge of the table. Talking to someone so uncultured is exhausting, she snapped. David, you should reconsider this marriage. Mary's mother is too crude for our family. Turning to Mary, she added, perhaps you should cut ties with this woman and learn proper manners if you want to be our daughter-in-law. David pleaded with her to stop, but she ignored him, her tirade building. Then, without warning, Wendy pulled a bottle from her bag and dumped its contents over my head. The stinging smell of alcohol filled the air. Poor people rub off on you, she said with a smirk. You need to be sanitized. Shock froze me in place as the liquid dripped from my hair. Mom, let's go, Mary said, her voice trembling with restrained anger. Yes, I said, rising slowly, trying to maintain my composure. David stood frozen, his face pale with disbelief. Mary took my hand and glared at Wendy, who simply smirked in return. I'm sorry, David, Mary said coldly, but don't apologize for her. She may think she's from a higher class, but soon enough, your company will go bankrupt. Wendy's smirk faltered as Mary's words cut through the tension like ice. Mary didn't wait for a response. She wiped the liquid from my clothes and led me out. We never returned to see Wendy again. David's apology. Days later, David arrived at our home, looking pale and exhausted. "I should have apologized sooner," he said, his voice trembling, "but I've been trying to convince my mother to admit she was wrong. She won't listen, so I came to apologize on my own." His shoulders sagged under the weight of his words. Though David wasn't my son, he had been part of our lives for 10 years, and it hurt to see him in such distress. "Come inside, David," I said gently. "Let's have some tea. You've been through a lot. Are you okay?" He hesitated before answering, as if gathering the courage to share what was on his mind. "To be honest, I've always hated my mom," he confessed. "She's always demanded repayment for raising me, always pressuring me to meet her expectations." I could imagine his situation all too well. I was told from a young age that I was the heir, that I had to follow the family's plan, but in high school, I rebelled. She wanted me to attend a prestigious private school, but I chose a public school with a baseball team instead. His face softened at the memory. "That's where I met Mary," he said, his voice steadying. "She was the team manager. I fell in love with her, and no matter what my mother says, I want to marry her. Please let me marry her." David trembled as he knelt on the floor, tears glistening in his eyes. "David, look up," I said, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "This isn't about me, it's about you and Mary. Over these 10 years, I've seen how deeply you care for her. If you love her that much, you don't need my permission, you already have my blessing." Tears streamed down David's face as relief washed over him. I trusted David with Mary's happiness. Slowly, he lifted his head, tears streaming down his face. The weight of his mother's actions must have terrified him, making him fear that everything he cherished might be lost. Yet, those tears revealed just how deeply he cared for Mary. "David," I said softly, "if you truly want to make Mary happy, you need to break free from your past." "I understand," he replied, his voice trembling. "This is about my mother, isn't it?" I nodded silently. "I'm tired of living in fear of her," he admitted, his voice growing steadier. "My father, who's still in the hospital, was the only one who ever understood me. He once told me that my mother could never see beyond her own ambitions. For his sake, I've made up my mind." I met his gaze firmly. "I'll support you and Mary, David, but it's up to you to take the next step." "I understand," he said resolutely. "I'll do it." The day finally came. Wendy arrived at the restaurant with a sour expression, clearly displeased. "What is this cheap place?" she asked, her voice filled with disdain as she scanned the humble family restaurant. It was a setting far removed from the elegance she was accustomed to. "These are the papers for the adoption," I said, sliding the documents across the table. "Adoption?" she repeated, her confusion evident. "Yes, David is officially joining our family." "This is outrageous," Wendy shouted, rising from her seat and slamming the table. "He's my only son. How dare you try to take him from me?" Her anger quickly turned to venom as she glared at Mary. "This marriage is a joke. Mary isn't worthy of David. We are of a different class. We help people like you, not the other way around." Wendy's words grew more unhinged, but I remained calm. "Why are you so obsessed with social status, Wendy?" I asked. "I work with many wealthy clients, but those truly born into wealth don't act like you. Only those who've recently come into money seem this insecure." Wendy's composure faltered, her hands trembling. "Don't compare me to those people," she hissed. "I was born into wealth." "Your actions say otherwise. What are you so afraid of?" At the word afraid, Wendy froze. "David told me you grew up being told you weren't good enough, because you were a girl," I continued. Her lips trembled. "So what? I was born a girl in a family where only men mattered. I had to marry an older man just to preserve my family's status." The bitterness in her voice was palpable, and the truth of her obsession finally came to light. "That's why you're so fixated on David being the heir. But if he marries Mary, your family's perfect lineage will be mixed with a—" "Shut up," Wendy shouted, cutting me off. "Enough." The room fell silent as David's father, Brian, entered, pushed in a wheelchair by his son. Though still recovering, he had received special permission to leave the hospital for this meeting. Wendy's face turned ashen. "No, you misunderstood," she stammered, her voice unsteady. "I never thought marrying you was humiliating. You were just what?" Brian interrupted with a weary sigh. "Dad says he's divorcing you, Mom," David said, his voice firm. Divorce? Wendy's voice broke. No, please, say something, Brian. But Brian remained silent, refusing even to look at her. Sorry to interrupt, Mary said, her voice calm yet cutting, but we've finalized all the necessary paperwork. Wendy flinched at Mary's words, visibly nervous. Oh, and by the way, Mary added, I own a significant amount of stock in your company. Wendy's eyes widened. What? That's impossible. Actually, it's true, Mary continued. I've held a substantial amount of shares in your company for quite some time. Realization dawned on Wendy's face as she pieced the truth together. Wait, were you that anonymous investor? That's right, Mary said with a small smile. But how? How could a poor family like yours invest that much? Wendy demanded, her voice rising with disbelief. I've been running my late husband's company ever since he passed away, I said calmly, and Mary has helped me manage it. We decided to sell all the shares we hold in your company. Wendy's face turned ghostly pale. No, please don't do that. If you sell now, the company will collapse under its debt. And after you're out of the picture, I'll buy back the shares, David interjected. You've been embezzling money from the company, haven't you, Mom? No, that's not true, Wendy protested, her voice shrill. I was just borrowing a little. I plan to pay it back. Even if you're the owner, you can't use company funds for personal reasons, David said coldly. You could face criminal charges. Wendy was at a loss, unable to defend herself. I've looked into everything, Mom. You've been dealing with shady loan sharks, haven't you? Tears streamed down Wendy's face. I didn't have a choice. I'll pay them back, just don't sell the shares. It's too late for that, David said firmly. From now on, you're no longer the head of the company. Please don't do this. I'll lose everything, Wendy pleaded desperately. David's face remained impassive. Mom, you've always seen me as a tool, not as your son. No, that's not true. I love you, David. If that's true, then tell me, what's my favorite food? Wendy fell silent, unable to answer. See, David said quietly, you don't even know. I'm just a tool to you. Now you'll have to fend for yourself. After David severed ties with her, Wendy's life spiraled out of control. Shunned by her family, she was left to face the consequences of her actions. David quickly removed her from her position as head of the company and appointed a new CEO. Wendy was sued for embezzlement and faced both criminal and civil charges. Desperate to escape her debts and legal troubles, she fled town, only to be arrested for theft. She was sentenced to prison, where she served her time alone. Not a single family member visited her. Meanwhile, David and Mary quietly began their new life together. They held a small, private wedding with close family in attendance. One day, Mary invited me to a baseball game, just like old times. On the way home, she handed me a black and white photograph. Mom, she said with a smile, you're going to be a grandmother. I haven't told David yet. I wanted you to be the first to know. Tears filled my eyes as I looked at the picture. I'm so happy we could go to the game together, I said, my voice thick with emotion. Next time, let's bring the whole family. Mary nodded. From a distance, I watched my daughter, her husband, and my newborn grandchild. What seemed like an ordinary day was, for us, a moment filled with joy and meaning.
Hi, my name is Emily. I'm 34 years old, and until a year ago, I thought I had the perfect life, a loving husband, a stepdaughter I adored, and a career I was proud of. But all that changed when I discovered just how far someone could go to tear apart a family. When I married my husband, Michael, 3 years ago, I knew his 14-year-old daughter, Chloe, would be a part of the package. She was bright, a little shy, and still adjusting to her parents' divorce. I did everything I could to make her feel loved and supported. I helped with her homework, attended her school plays, and planned fun weekend outings. But as time went on, things began to shift. Chloe grew distant, and her behavior changed. At first, I thought it was just teenage angst, but soon, I realized there was more to the story. It started with small things, missing items around the house, snide comments muttered under her breath, and a sudden unwillingness to spend time with me. Then came the accusations. Dad, Emily doesn't like me, she told Michael one evening after dinner. Michael looked at me, confused. What are you talking about, Chloe? Emily's always been kind to you. Chloe crossed her arms and gave me a glare. You don't see the way she talks to me when you're not around. I was stunned. Chloe, that's not true. I've never said anything mean to you. But the doubt was already planted in Michael's mind. Over the next few months, Chloe's accusations escalated. She claimed I ignored her, blamed her for things I didn't do, and even made up stories about me yelling at her when Michael wasn't home. One night, Michael confronted me. Emily, Chloe says you've been treating her unfairly. What's going on? I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. Michael, none of that is true. I don't know why she's saying these things. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I don't know what to believe anymore. The tension in our home was unbearable. Michael was caught between his daughter and me, and no matter how much I tried to prove my innocence, Chloe always found a way to make me look like the villain. The final straw came on Chloe's 15th birthday. I had spent weeks planning a special day for her, a surprise party with all her friends, her favorite cake, and decorations in her favorite colors. But when she walked in, instead of being happy, she burst into tears. Why did you do this without asking me? She sobbed. You ruined everything. Michael rushed to her side, glaring at me. Emily, why would you plan something she didn't want? I was heartbroken. I thought she'd like it. I was trying to make her happy. Chloe stormed out, leaving me standing there in front of the confused guests. It was clear that no matter what I did, I could never win. After Chloe's meltdown at her birthday party, everything spiraled out of control. Michael's trust in me eroded even further, and I began to feel like a stranger in my own home. Chloe's behavior grew bolder. She started twisting my words, fabricating events that never happened, and constantly playing the victim. One day, Michael confronted me with something that left me speechless. Chloe told me you said she wasn't welcome in this house anymore. Is that true? I felt my stomach drop. What? Michael, I would never say that. She said you told her yesterday, after I left for work. He pressed, his tone sharp. Michael, I've spent the last 2 days preparing her favorite meal and cleaning up for her study group. Why would I do that if I didn't want her here? But no matter how much I tried to explain, Chloe's tears and trembling voice always seemed to win him over. One evening, I overheard Chloe talking on the phone in her room. Her door was slightly ajar, and I couldn't help but listen. She's going to leave soon. I know it. Dad can't stand how she treats me. I just have to keep this up a little longer, she whispered, laughing softly. I froze in place, my heart pounding. This wasn't a misunderstanding, this was deliberate. Chloe was orchestrating my downfall, and Michael was falling for it. I knew I had to act, but how could I prove what I heard without coming across as paranoid or vindictive? Things came to a head one fateful night. Michael came home from work, his expression unreadable. He sat me down in the living room, Chloe lurking in the background with a smug smile on her face. Emily, I can't do this anymore, he said, his voice trembling. Chloe feels unsafe around you, and I can't have that in my house. I think it's best if you stay somewhere else for a while. Tears welled up in my eyes. Michael, are you serious? You're asking me to leave because of lies she's telling you? I don't know what's true anymore, he admitted, looking away. Chloe smirked behind him, a look of triumph flashing across her face. With a heavy heart, I packed a bag and left the house that night, but as I walked out the door, I promised myself one thing: I would not let Chloe win. Staying at a friend's place gave me time to think. I went over every interaction, every argument, and every detail that might prove my innocence. Chloe's behavior wasn't just a rebellious teenager acting out, it was manipulative and calculated. I decided to take a bold step. If Chloe wanted to destroy me, I would fight back, but not in anger. I would do it with the truth. First, I reached out to a family therapist. explaining the situation and asking for advice. Then, I began documenting everything: texts, notes, overheard conversations, even comments Chloe made in front of others. The first step to regaining control was building an undeniable case, and I was ready to see it through. With my plan in place, I started gathering evidence to expose Chloe's lies. The family therapist I consulted emphasized the importance of a calm, methodical approach. Chloe's manipulative tactics relied on creating chaos, and I needed to counter that with clarity and proof. One day, I decided to visit Chloe's school. I had always respected her privacy, but I suspected that her behavior at home might mirror her behavior elsewhere. I met with her guidance counselor, Mrs. Adams, under the guise of discussing Chloe's academic progress. Mrs. Adams greeted me warmly but looked hesitant. "Actually, I've been meaning to speak with someone about Chloe. She's incredibly bright, but I've noticed some concerning patterns. She often blames others when things don't go her way and can be, let's say, manipulative in social settings." Hearing this validated everything I had been experiencing. "Has she ever mentioned any issues at home?" I asked cautiously. "She's brought up some conflicts," Mrs. Adams said delicately. "But the stories don't always align." I've been hesitant to intervene without concrete evidence. Her words were a revelation. Chloe's behavior wasn't just targeted at me, it was a consistent pattern. Back at my temporary residence, I combed through old texts and emails. I even found a journal Chloe had accidentally left out one day, a collection of her grievances, twisted half-truths, and fabricated stories about me. One entry stood out: "If Dad thinks she's the bad guy, I can finally get the attention I deserve." It was chilling to read, but it solidified my resolve. Chloe's actions were rooted in insecurity, but they were causing real harm. The turning point came when I received an unexpected text from one of Chloe's friends, Mia. She'd overheard Chloe bragging about how she got rid of me and felt compelled to reach out. She said it was all part of her plan to make you look bad. "I thought you should know," Mia wrote. Armed with this message and the growing mountain of evidence, I knew it was time to confront Michael. But I also wanted Chloe to face the consequences of her actions in a way that encouraged accountability rather than outright punishment. I arranged a meeting at the therapist's office, where I presented my findings to Michael. As I spoke, I could see the realization dawning on his face. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" he asked, guilt evident in his eyes. "I tried, Michael. But you were too blinded by Chloe's manipulation to see it," I replied. "I love her, but this behavior has to stop, for everyone's sake." When Chloe was brought into the session, her initial defiance quickly crumbled under the weight of the evidence. The therapist guided the conversation, ensuring it remained constructive. I wanted you to notice me more," Chloe admitted tearfully. "It felt like she was taking you away from me." For the first time in months, I saw a glimmer of the vulnerable teenager Chloe truly was beneath the scheming facade. It was clear she needed help, and as a family, we committed to getting it for her. But I also made it clear, I wouldn't tolerate being treated as a scapegoat anymore. Boundaries were set, and Michael apologized profusely for doubting me. The confrontation in the therapist's office marked a turning point, but it wasn't the end of the journey, it was only the beginning. Michael was overcome with remorse for his earlier behavior. He took me out to dinner to apologize properly, away from the tension of home. "I should have trusted you," he admitted, his voice heavy with guilt. I let Chloe's words cloud my judgment because I was so scared of losing her too. "I see now how much I've hurt you." Hearing those words felt like a balm on my wounds, but trust isn't repaired with an apology alone. I told him, "I'm willing to try, but we both need to work on rebuilding what we've lost." He agreed, and for the first time in months, I felt like we were truly on the same team. With therapy, Chloe began to open up about her feelings of abandonment after her mother left. Her manipulative behavior was a misguided cry for attention and control. While her progress was slow, there were signs of change. She began apologizing more sincerely and even took steps to mend our relationship. One evening, she handed me a card that read, "I'm sorry for what I did. I hope we can start over." It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. I also had to establish firm boundaries. Chloe needed to understand that manipulation wouldn't be tolerated. Michael and I agreed to a united front, no more taking sides. We created family rules, one of which included weekly family dinners where everyone shared their highs and lows of the week. It was awkward at first, but gradually, we found moments of connection. A few months later, Michael surprised me with a weekend getaway. "You deserve a break," he said with a smile. It was a gesture that reminded me of the man I fell in love with. Meanwhile, Chloe continued therapy and slowly began to rebuild her relationships, not just with me but also with her peers. Her transformation wasn't overnight, but she was putting in the work.
When my relatives saw the beautifully arranged quality meat courses delivered, they all exclaimed, "Wow, that looks delicious. This is so fancy," but in front of me, there was only a solitary cup of tea. My mother-in-law peeked out from behind the door, grinning in a sly, almost childish way. How typical, I thought. Even today, she couldn't resist trying to torment me. I blurted out, "It's been so long since the family got together. Delicious food should be enjoyed by everyone in the family, right?" But her food grudges were legendary, and I decided it was time to teach her a lesson. "My name is Sarah, I'm 35 years old, and I work in an office. I live with my husband, Jake, who is the youngest of 3 brothers. Jake is kind, easygoing, and we've been married for 5 years. We don't have kids yet, but I've recently started trying to get pregnant. Every time I see my mother-in-law, she pesters me with, 'Still no grandkids?' I've been carefully watching my sleep, nutrition, and timing, but there's one thing holding me back. I'll likely need her help if I have a child." She's almost 66, divorced, and living alone, but she's still active and works part-time. Despite that, it's clear she despises me. To her, I'm the woman who stole her precious youngest son. Once, when Jake and I visited her, he stepped away to use the bathroom. The moment he left, she shot me a sharp look and said, "Sarah, hasn't Jake gained weight?" I shook my head. "I don't think so." "Oh, he definitely has. It's your duty to keep your husband healthy. If he gains weight, he'll get sick." "What are you feeding him? Greasy junk food?" I was dumbfounded. I try to prepare balanced meals, and besides, I can't control what Jake eats at work or when he's out with friends. Maybe it would be more effective to mention this to him directly, I said, trying to stay calm. "What? That would hurt his feelings. It's your job to look after him." I sighed inwardly. Do I really have to babysit a grown man? When Jake returned, I asked him outright, "Honey, have you gained weight recently?" "Huh? No, actually, I've lost a little," he said. The air froze. My mother-in-law's face turned pale as she snapped, "Lost weight? Sarah, are you starving him?" She suddenly flipped her accusation, claiming I wasn't feeding him enough. Jake looked bewildered. "Mom, that's not true. Everything's fine." But she was relentless. "If people start gossiping that you're a terrible wife because Jake looks too skinny, it'll be your fault." Sarah. I was speechless. Whether Jake gains or loses weight, I'm the one getting blamed. The tea-only dinners. Visiting her house for dinner is no better. She insists we come over often, so we do, mostly out of politeness. She serves beautifully plated seasonal dishes, fresh raw fish, seasonal vegetables, warm corn soup, and fried rice. Everyone is served, except me. All I get is a cup of tea. Once, I tried to clarify. I didn't say I wasn't hungry." "Oh, but you said you didn't want anything, didn't you?" she said, feigning innocence. "I didn't say that." "Well, sorry, I must have misunderstood. You know, I'm just an old lady." At first, I believed her, but the pattern repeated every time. She'd apologize with her classic line, "I'm just a forgetful old woman," leaving me unable to call her out without looking petty. Finally, I had enough. After being served only tea for the 3rd time, I stood up. "Let me help you, Mom," I said, heading to the kitchen. I served myself some rice and soup and then sat down, grabbing a few side dishes from Jake's plate. She frowned. "Sarah, I told you to stay out of the kitchen, and now you're taking your husband's food?" I smiled sweetly. "Your cooking is just so delicious." I couldn't resist. Jake looked uncomfortable, but finally spoke up. "Come on, Mom, This isn't like you. There's no reason to give Sarah a hard time. Oh, no, it's not like that, she stammered. It was just an old habit. I must have miscounted. Her excuse was weak, and I was now sure her actions were deliberate. Turning the tables, the next time we visited, she prepared chicken and eggs for the main course, foods I couldn't eat because of allergies. When I stared at my cup of tea, wondering what to do, Jake stepped in. Mom, you remember Sarah can't eat chicken and eggs, right? Did you make something else for her? Caught off guard, she stammered. Oh, of course, I thought I'd order takeout for her. Sarah, pick whatever you'd like. I smiled. Thank you, I'll have fries. Her face twitched, but she couldn't back out. When the fries arrived late, I savored them, ignoring her displeasure. Small victories like these remind me to stay resilient. One day, I'll do more than just hold my ground. I'll teach her that respect goes both ways. I slightly regretted ordering fries. I knew my mother-in-law wouldn't let it slide and would probably make some snide comment like, "Fries are for children." I also decided not to mention that I could eat eggs as long as they weren't raw. There was no point in giving her ammunition. The petty battle between us continued. Once, I proudly brought over some homemade dishes under the guise of sharing. I prepared seasoned rice and simmered vegetables, packing them neatly in a container. I thought, if there's no meal for me, at least I can eat this. But my mother-in-law was one step ahead. Why did you bring something so dirty? She asked, frowning in exaggerated disgust. Dirty? I was taken aback. The rice and vegetables, everything's brown. You should think about presentation, she sneered, sounding like a self-proclaimed aristocrat. But it's delicious, I countered. I came up with the recipe myself. You really have no taste, she said bluntly, so careless and no sense of refinement at all. For some reason, this time she didn't hold back and insulted me outright. Then, as if to add insult to injury, she picked up my container and dumped its contents into the trash. It had gone bad, she said with a dismissive wave. My anger boiled over. That's not possible. At that moment, Jake walked in. What's going on? Why are you shouting? My mother-in-law's fierce expression instantly morphed into a sweet smile. Oh, Sarah's cooking had gone bad, so I threw it out. Jake frowned. That's too bad, it's usually so tasty. Tasty? That brown food? She muttered under her breath. I was livid. Wasting food is something I simply cannot forgive. That day, as usual, I had only tea. I drank it down defiantly while my mother-in-law smirked, clearly enjoying my frustration. A festive family gathering. A week later, we all gathered for my niece's birthday. Jake's 3 brothers, their families, and several relatives we hadn't seen since our wedding were there. The atmosphere was lively, with laughter and chatter filling the air. The tables were pushed together in the recreation room, creating a long banquet setup. My mother-in-law spared no expense for the occasion. The table was lavishly set with appetizers, soup, salad, steak, mashed potatoes, and desserts, all restaurant-quality dishes. Everyone marveled at the spread, exclaiming, "Wow, this looks amazing, and so luxurious." Pleased with the praise, my mother-in-law said, I indulged, because it's been so long since the whole family got together. Let's enjoy these delicious dishes together. But at my seat, as always, there was only tea. My mother-in-law peeked out from behind a sliding door, smirking at me. Even on such a joyous occasion, she found a way to torment me. I felt conflicted. If I pointed out the lack of food at my place, the relatives, unaware of her antics, might offer to share their dishes, which would only give her an excuse to say, "Oh, I must have forgotten. Silly me," and then, she'd likely whisper behind my back, "Sarah's so greedy." As I sipped my tea, anger bubbled inside me. I wanted her to admit her pettiness and apologize. Instead, she continued smirking, relishing my discomfort. Finally, I stood up. "Thank you for the meal. It seems I'm not considered family, so I'll be leaving now. Please, everyone, enjoy yourselves." The room fell silent. The relatives exchanged confused glances, whispering to each other. "What's going on? Is something wrong?" someone asked. Feigning innocence, my mother-in-law tilted her head. "Oh my, what's the matter, Sarah?" "There's no meal for me," I said plainly. Her face shifted to mock surprise. "Oh, dear, what should we do? How careless of me." "Come on, what are you talking about? You knew exactly what you were doing," I said, my voice cold. Calmly, she walked over with a tray. "Here it is. I just forgot to put it at your seat. No need to make such a fuss," she said with a smug smile. I looked down at the tray, and my stomach sank. It wasn't the steak and sides everyone else had. Instead, it was filled with egg salad, thick omelets, and pudding, all things I couldn't eat due to my egg allergy. My hands trembled. This was deliberate. Jake noticed and stepped in. "Mother, this is terrible. You know Sarah's allergic to eggs." Feigning shock, she gasped, "Oh my, I didn't order this. Could the restaurant have made a mistake?" I was seething but kept my composure. At that moment, my niece peeked at the egg-filled tray and exclaimed, "Can I have some?" The children at the table, not too fond of rare steak, eagerly traded their meat courses for the egg dishes. Now, in front of me was a plate of perfectly cooked steak and sides. "Well, then," I said with a smile, picking up my knife and fork, "thank you for the food." Before I could take a bite, my mother-in-law interjected, "Hold on, you must not know this, so let me teach you. Normally, daughters-in-law only eat the appetizers." Her words echoed through the room. I froze, my knife and fork still in hand. Finally, she had revealed her true colors. Taking advantage of the silence, she snatched the meat courses away from me and scolded, "And you shouldn't give your food to the children. They need to eat everything, including their steaks." Her malicious smile sent chills down my spine. The other daughters-in-law exchanged uneasy glances and began to apologize. "I'm sorry for eating the steak, even though I'm just the daughter-in-law. I'm sorry for drinking the soup, even though I'm just the daughter-in-law. And I'm sorry for eating the mashed potatoes, even though I'm just the daughter-in-law." The sight of them apologizing one after another shook the room. No, that's not what I meant," my mother-in-law stammered. "When I said daughter-in-law, I meant Sarah." The daughters-in-law looked at her coldly. "We're daughters-in-law too. Does that mean we're not recognized as family either?" My mother-in-law's face flushed as she struggled to explain. I took a deep breath and addressed the room. "Mother always serves me tea, nothing else, every single time we visit. It's because I'm not considered part of the family, but treating me like this, knowing I have an egg allergy, that's too much." The relatives began murmuring in disapproval. My mother-in-law's carefully crafted image started to crumble as she tried, and failed, to come up with an excuse. "Oh, I completely forgot about your allergy, Sarah. I could have sworn you liked eggs, but maybe I was mistaken," my mother-in-law stammered, her tone full of false innocence. "But you just said you didn't order this, didn't you?" I replied sharply, my frustration bubbling over. "Did I say that? Did I really?" she mumbled, her web of lies beginning to unravel. "You did this on purpose, didn't you? You've always been like this." My husband, Jake, interjected, his voice cold and steady. The accusation made her visibly pale. "Stop it, Mom, this isn't right," Jake continued, his disappointment evident. "It's not like that at all," she cried, desperately trying to deny her actions, but it was too late. The truth hung heavy in the room. "So, you never really considered Sarah part of the family," Jake said, his voice, though calm, carried a weight that silenced everyone. "Then I guess I'm not family either. Sorry for thinking I was all this time." Her face crumpled as her sons exchanged incredulous glances. Jake's brothers chimed in. "Mom, what's going on? Are you harassing Sarah like this?" one of them asked. "No, it's just Sarah," she blurted out, a slip of the tongue that exposed her true intentions. Her panic was palpable. The relatives, sensing the shift in tone, began finishing their meals and quietly leaving the table. The daughters-in-law, one by one, placed money on the table as if signaling their resignation from the farce. My mother-in-law's demeanor crumbled further. I didn't mean for it to come out that way," she stammered, her voice trembling, "but the damage was done." The egg courses sat untouched before me, their presence a silent reminder of her petty cruelty. I glanced at them, then at Jake, who gave me a small nod. I picked up my fork. "This is delicious," I declared after taking a bite. "The aroma of the omelet is irresistible." My voice was light, but my words carried weight. "Sarah, stop eating that," my mother-in-law shrieked, trying to snatch the plate away. Jake grabbed her arm, his voice firm. "Mom, you need to apologize for everything. If it wasn't Sarah, it could have been someone else, and they might not have stayed as strong." Her bitterness twisted her face, and she finally snapped. "Yes, I knew about her allergy. I didn't like her. She took my last son away from me." The room fell silent, her confession echoing loudly. "I wasn't ready to let him go," she continued, her voice cracking. "I wanted him to stay here, with me, where I could take care of him." Jake's expression darkened. "Mom, I'm 40 years old. What did you expect? For me to live here until I was 50, 60? Her protest was feeble. and any sympathy she might have garnered evaporated. The conversation was interrupted by a cheerful voice at the door. It was the delivery man, here to collect the trays. "Oh, I didn't realize this was your house," he said to me, surprised. "I thought it was just another delivery." I smiled politely. "It's my in-laws' house, but I recognized your restaurant's dishes right away from the taste. I've been a frequent customer." My mother-in-law's confusion grew as she listened. "Wait, what do you mean?" she asked, her voice faltering. I said, meeting her gaze. "I've been stopping by his restaurant because you never prepare food for me." The delivery man, oblivious to the tension, chuckled. "Oh, so this is the famous mother-in-law I've heard about, the one who forgets her daughter-in-law's meals." Her face turned ashen. "That's enough," she snapped, trying to shut the door on him, but the damage was already done. Jake sighed, looking at her with a mix of disappointment and resolve. "Mom, you've always wanted us to come over, but I think it's best if we don't visit anymore." "Don't say that," she cried, her voice desperate. "Just come, even if it's only you." Jake shook his head. "No, Mom, my wife is my family, and if she's not welcome, neither am I." Her protests faded into silence as we left the house together. From that day forward, Jake's brothers and their wives also began to distance themselves. It turned out they'd been mistreated in similar ways, but had remained silent out of fear or resignation. Despite her attempts to contact Jake secretly, he stood firm. "Mom, I don't need your cooking anymore, and I won't be coming back for a while," he told her. Over time, the bonds between her and her family frayed, her actions leaving her isolated. Meanwhile, Jake and I looked forward to a brighter, happier chapter, one built on mutual respect, love, and, of course, delicious meals shared as a family.
The restaurant buzzed with romantic dinner conversation and clinking glasses, but Mark's attention remained fixed on his phone. I sat across from him, the carefully wrapped anniversary gift growing heavy in my lap. "Mark?" I tried again. "Should we order?" Oh yeah, whatever you want, Olivia," he mumbled, still typing. My name is Olivia Chen, and I was celebrating my 5th wedding anniversary alone, watching my husband text someone who clearly mattered more than this milestone moment. I set the gift, a vintage Rolex I'd spent months tracking down, on the table between us. "I got you something special." He finally looked up, offering that distracted half-smile I'd grown too familiar with lately. "Thanks, babe. Can we do gifts later? I've got a work situation I need to handle." Work. It was always work these days. Mark's investment firm had been incredibly busy for months now, requiring late nights, weekend calls, and endless texting. I'd been understanding, supportive even. That's what good wives did, right? The waiter approached with menus, but before he could speak, Mark's phone buzzed again. "Sorry, I need to take this," he said, standing. "Order something for me." I watched him hurry toward the exit, phone already at his ear. The waiter gave me a sympathetic look. "Would you like to start with some wine?" "Make it a double." I sighed. My own phone vibrated with a text from my best friend, Kate. "Call me ASAP. Need to show you something." I excused myself from the table and headed to the restroom. Kate answered on the first ring. "Please tell me you haven't given him the watch yet," she said without preamble. "Not yet. He's too busy with work calls to open it." "Why?" "Liv," she hesitated. "I need you to look at something, but you should be sitting down." "I'm in a restaurant bathroom, Kate. Just show me." An image appeared on my screen, a dating app profile featuring my husband's photo. Marcus Stevens, 35, investment manager. Looking for discreet fun with no strings attached. Last active, 2 minutes ago. The world tilted sideways. I gripped the marble countertop, studying the image. It was definitely Mark. The photo was from our vacation in Bali last year. I'd taken it myself. "There's more," Kate said gently. "He's been active on multiple sites. My cousin matched with him last week. That's how I found out." She didn't know he was married. I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The black dress I'd bought specially for tonight suddenly felt too tight, too desperate. "Liv, are you okay?" "He's on a work call right now," I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. "Probably arranging some discreet fun." "Come over," Kate urged. "We'll figure this out together." "No," I straightened my spine, decision made. "I need to handle this my way." When I returned to the table, Mark was back, finally putting his phone away. "Sorry about that. Did you order?" I picked up the gift and dropped it in my purse. I'm not feeling well. I think I should go home. He barely looked disappointed. Yeah, okay. I got some emails to catch up on anyway. Want me to call you an Uber? Don't bother, I said, standing. I'm sure you're too busy for a sick wife. He didn't catch the bitterness in my tone, already pulling his phone out again. At home, I went straight to Mark's home office. After 5 years of marriage, I knew his habits, his patterns. He was meticulous about some things, careless about others. Like using the same passwords for everything. Our anniversary date, which now felt like a cruel joke. His work laptop was password protected, but it only took one try to get in. What I found made my blood run cold. It wasn't just dating sites. There were encrypted emails, suspicious financial transactions, and folders labeled with what looked like code names. This wasn't normal investment firm activity. I started taking screenshots, but there was too much. I needed help understanding what I was seeing. I called the one person I knew could help, my brother Rian, a cybersecurity specialist. I need you to look at something, I said when he answered, but you can't tell anyone, not even Kate yet. Give me 20 minutes, he replied. While waiting for Ryan, I kept digging. Mark had a hidden email account under his dating profile name Marcus Stevens. The emails were concerning discussions about offshore accounts, untraceable transactions, and something called Project Eclipse. I heard Mark's car pull into the driveway and quickly shut everything down, my heart pounding. By the time he came upstairs, I was in bed pretending to sleep. Feeling better? He asked, not really expecting an answer. I kept my breathing even as he changed and slipped into bed, immediately reaching for his phone. The blue light illuminated his face as he typed, probably messaging one of his dating matches, or worse, based on what I found on his laptop. The next morning, I waited until Mark left for work before meeting Ryan at his apartment. His reaction to the screenshots confirmed my worst fears. Liv, he said slowly, this isn't just cheating. Your husband is involved in something seriously illegal. These transactions, they match patterns we look for in money laundering operations. I sank onto his couch, clutching my coffee mug. Money laundering? For who? That's what we need to find out. Ryan was already setting up his equipment. But first, we need to be careful. If he's involved in what I think he is, this could be dangerous. What do you recommend? We document everything quietly. I'll help you set up secure monitoring on his devices. But Liv, he caught my eye, you need to act normal. If he suspects you know anything, it could be bad. I thought about the man I'd married 5 years ago, the charming, ambitious investment manager who'd swept me off my feet. Had any of it been real? What about the dating profiles? I asked. Actually, those might be part of it, Ryan mused. Perfect cover for meeting certain types of clients. Plus, if anyone got suspicious, it would just look like typical cheating husband behavior. The pieces were starting to fit together. The constant texting, the late nights, the sudden influx of new clients at his firm. I need to get access to his other laptop, I said. The one he keeps in his office downtown. Ryan raised an eyebrow. You think there's one there? He mentioned it once, said it was for sensitive client information. I bet that's where the real records are kept. We spent the next few hours setting up surveillance software and secure communication channels. Ryan taught me how to access and document everything safely, leaving no trace of my investigations. One more thing, he said before I left. I'm giving you this burner phone. Use it only for contacting me about this. And Liv? Be careful. Men like this, they don't react well to being exposed. That evening, I played the perfect wife. I apologized for ruining our anniversary dinner, suggested we reschedule. Mark barely looked up from his phone. Sure, whenever you want, he said absently. I might be traveling next week though, big client meetings. I wondered how many of those client meetings were actually dates, or worse, something more sinister. Actually, I said casually, I might stop by your office tomorrow, bring you lunch. We barely see each other these days. That got his attention. He looked up sharply. No need. I'll be in meetings all day. Oh, with who? Just clients. Look, I've got work to do. He stood, heading to his home office. Don't wait up. I heard him lock the door, something he'd started doing recently. Through the wall, I could hear the murmur of his voice as he made another work call. On my burner phone, I texted Ryan, need to get into his office tomorrow. Can you help? His reply came quickly. Already working on it. Be ready at 9 a.m. I lay in bed that night, listening to Mark type and talk in his office, wondering how I'd missed the signs for so long. The separate bank accounts he'd insisted on. The mysterious business trips. The way he'd discouraged me from visiting his office. My husband wasn't just a cheater, he was a criminal, and tomorrow I was going to prove it. The morning sun glinted off the glass and steel facade of Mark's office building as I approached, dressed in my most professional outfit. Ryan had done his homework. The security guard was on break, replaced by a temporary worker who didn't know the regular staff. Mrs. Stevens, I said confidently, using Mark's dating profile surname. Here to surprise my husband. The guard barely glanced at me before waving me through. Mark's firm occupied the entire 15th floor. But at 9 a.m., most offices were still empty. I used my copy of his keycard, made months ago when he asked me to pick up some urgent documents to access his private office. The space looked different from my last visit. Gone were the family photos, the art pieces I'd helped him choose. The room felt sterile, impersonal. Like the man himself, I realized. A facade hiding something darker. I found the laptop exactly where I expected, in a hidden wall safe behind his degrees. The combination wasn't our anniversary this time, but our first date, 10 to 15-17. Some part of him was still sentimental, it seemed. Following Ryan's instructions, I connected the special USB drive he'd given me. It would create a perfect copy of the hard drive while leaving no trace of access. As it worked, I photographed documents from Mark's desk with my burner phone. "You shouldn't be here." I froze. The voice wasn't Mark's, but I recognized it. Janet, his assistant. She stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable. "Janet," I said calmly, though my heart was racing. "I was just leaving Mark a surprise." "Was that before or after you started copying his files?" She stepped into the office, closing the door behind her. "I've been watching you, Mrs. Chen. You're smarter than he gives you credit for." I studied her carefully. Janet had worked for Mark for 3 years, always professional, always slightly distant. Now she seemed different. "How long have you known?" I asked. "About the money laundering, since the beginning. About the dating profiles? Those came later." She moved to the window, looking out over the city. "But you're not here about his affairs, are you?" "No," I admitted. "I'm here about Project Eclipse." Janet turned back to me, a hint of respect in her eyes. "Then you should know, it's bigger than just Mark. Much bigger." She reached into her bag and pulled out a flash drive. 3 years of documentation. Account numbers, client lists, everything. "I've been gathering evidence since I realized what they were really doing." "Why are you helping me?" "Because they killed my sister." Her voice hardened. She was an accountant at one of their shell companies. Got suspicious, started asking questions. Had a car accident 2 weeks later. The USB drive finished copying. I removed it carefully, trying to process this new information. "Who are they?" "The same people your husband works for. The ones using this investment firm to clean money for some very dangerous people." She handed me her flash drive. "There's a meeting tomorrow night. Everyone will be there, the whole network. That's your chance." "Why haven't you gone to the authorities?" Janet's laugh was bitter. "With what proof? Against these people. I'd disappear before I could file a report. But you're his wife. You have access no one else has." My phone buzzed. A text from Mark. "Coming to office early. Be there in 20. Janet saw the message over my shoulder. "Go. I'll clean up here, make it look untouched." "But Olivia," she caught my arm as I reached the door. "Be careful. The people behind this, they make Mark look like an amateur." I made it out of the building just as Mark's car pulled into the parking garage. Back in my car, hands shaking, I called Ryan. "You're not going to believe what just happened," I said. We met at a coffee shop 3 towns over, where I told him everything. He'd examined Janet's flash drive carefully before connecting it to his secure laptop. "Holy shit," he whispered as files populated the screen. "Liv, this is major cartel money, international trafficking operations. Your husband's firm isn't just laundering money, they're financing criminal enterprises across the globe." Janet mentioned a meeting tomorrow night. "Everyone involved will be there." Ryan looked up sharply. "That's our chance. But we need to do this right. One wrong move." "I know," I said. "But I have an idea." That evening, I played my role perfectly. When Mark mentioned working late the next night, I didn't question it. When he kissed my cheek absently before bed, I didn't flinch. But as he slept, I was setting everything in motion. The next day passed in a blur of preparation. Ryan set up surveillance equipment while I coordinated with Janet, who provided security codes and meeting details. By evening, everything was in place. I tracked Mark's phone as he drove to an abandoned warehouse outside the city. Janet's intel was solid. Cars were arriving from all directions, parking in the shadows. Through the hidden camera we'd placed earlier, I watched figures in expensive suits enter the building. "Ready?" Ryan asked from our surveillance position. I thought about the last 5 years, the lies, the betrayal, the casual cruelty of a man who'd use our marriage as cover for his crimes. Ready. The raid was swift and silent. Federal agents had been waiting for exactly this kind of gathering. Within minutes, the warehouse was surrounded. I watched through binoculars as Mark was led out in handcuffs, his face a mask of confusion and rage. Then he saw me standing beside the lead agent as she read him his rights. His expression shifted from rage to disbelief to something like fear. "Why?" he asked as they led him past me. "We had everything." "No, Mark," I said quietly. "You had everything. I just had lies." The aftermath was chaos. News of the bust made international headlines. Major criminal network exposed. Investment firm front for global crime syndicate. Mark and his associates faced decades in prison. The evidence Janet and I had gathered ensured there would be no deals, no escapes. I filed for divorce the next day. The Rolex, his anniversary gift, I donated to a charity supporting victims of trafficking. It seemed fitting somehow. Months later, I received a letter from Mark's lawyer. He wanted to meet, to explain himself. I sent back a single response, a screenshot of his dating profile, with 2 words added: "No thanks." Janet stayed on at the firm, helping the new management rebuild its legitimate business. She started a foundation in her sister's name, supporting whistleblowers who expose financial crimes. As for me, I learned that sometimes the biggest betrayals lead to the most important discoveries, not just about others, but about ourselves. Mark had underestimated me, assumed I was too trusting, too naive to uncover his deception. Last week, I received a commendation from the FBI for my role in the investigation. The ceremony was private, my name kept out of public records for safety, but meaningful. Kate and Ryan were there, along with Janet. To taking down bad guys, Kate toasted afterward. To justice, Janet added. To truth, I said, thinking of that anniversary night that had started it all. Even when it hurts. The dating profiles that had first exposed Mark's deception were just the tip of the iceberg. But they led me to uncover something far more important than infidelity. They'd shown me my own strength, my capacity for justice, my unwillingness to look away from evil, even when it wore the face of someone I loved. Mark had taught me an invaluable lesson, though not the one he'd intended. He'd shown me that sometimes the greatest acts of love are not the rings we wear or the anniversaries we celebrate, but the moments when we stand up and say, "Enough." I still wear my wedding ring sometimes, not out of sentimentality, but as a reminder that truth, no matter how painful, is always preferable to comfortable lies. A reminder that justice, though slow, is worth pursuing. A reminder that sometimes the happy ending isn't the one we planned, but the one we fight for. The warehouse where it all ended has been demolished now, replaced by a community center. I drive past it sometimes, remembering the night everything changed. The night I stopped being Mark's wife and became something more important, my own hero. They say every ending is just a new beginning. Mine started with a dating profile and ended with a federal investigation. Not the anniversary gift I expected, but exactly the one I needed. And somewhere in a federal prison, Mark is learning that his biggest mistake wasn't getting caught. It was underestimating the woman he married. The smell of garlic and basil hit me as soon as I opened the back door of Bella Rosa. Even after 6 months away, the scent was so familiar it made my chest ache. This restaurant had been my whole world growing up. The place where I'd done homework at corner tables, learned to make pasta at my nana's knee, and watched my parents build their dream into reality. Now it belonged to my brother Tommy, and I was just a visitor. My name is Julia Romano, and 6 months ago, I agreed to let my younger brother take control of our family restaurant after our parents retired to Florida. It seemed logical at the time. I had a successful career in software development, while Tony had worked at Bella Rosa since high school. But something about his eagerness to take over had never sat right with me. Jules, Maria, our longtime hostess, spotted me as I made my way through the kitchen. "Oh my God, you're back." She rushed to hug me, her familiar perfume mixing with the cooking smells. "We've missed you around here. It's different now." The hesitation in her voice made me pause. "Different how?" Before she could answer, Tony's voice boomed from the office. "Who let you in the back door?" I turned to face my brother, noting how his traditionally warm brown eyes had turned cold and businesslike. At 32, 2 years younger than me, he'd always been the charming one, the social butterfly. But something had changed in him since taking over the restaurant. "I still have my key," I said, holding it up. "Dad never asked for it back." "Well, you should have called first," he said, straightening his expensive suit jacket. The designer label was new. Tony used to say only pretentious people spent that much on clothes. "We're busy preparing for dinner service." "It's 3 in the afternoon," I pointed out. "And I need to get something from Dad's office." "My office now," he corrected quickly. "What do you need?" Mom called. She can't find their wedding anniversary photo album and thinks Dad left it in his desk when they moved. Tony's face tightened almost imperceptibly. I cleaned everything out of that desk. There was no album. "I'd like to check myself if you don't mind." It meant a lot to Mom. He blocked the office doorway, his shoulder tense. "I said I cleaned it out. Don't you trust me?" The question hung in the air between us, heavy with unspoken tension. Once, I would have said yes without hesitation. Tony and I had been close growing up, partners in crime in the controlled chaos of a family restaurant. But lately, 10 minutes, I said firmly. "That's all I need." He stared at me for a long moment, then stepped aside with obvious reluctance. "Fine, but make it quick. I have a supplier meeting soon." The office looked different than I remembered. Dad's old football posters were gone, replaced by modern art pieces that seemed out of place in a family Italian restaurant. His ancient desktop computer had been upgraded to a sleek laptop. Even the familiar smell of his cigars had been masked by some expensive air freshener. I went straight to the desk, pulling open drawers that had once been organized chaos but were now meticulously arranged. No photo album. I was about to give up when I noticed something odd about the bottom drawer. It seemed shallower than I remembered. Kneeling down, I ran my fingers along the edges until I felt it. A slight gap that shouldn't be there. With careful pressure, the false bottom popped up, revealing a hidden compartment. There was no photo album. Instead, I found a small black device about the size of a USB drive. When I picked it up, I realized what it was: a wireless camera receiver. "Find what you were looking for." I jumped at Tommy's voice, quickly palming the device. "No album," I said, standing up. "Mom must have packed it after all." He nodded, but his eyes narrowed slightly. "Then I guess you're done here." That night, alone in my apartment, I connected the receiver to my laptop. As a software developer, I knew my way around most technology. It took only a few minutes to access the stored footage. What I saw made my blood run cold. The camera had been hidden in the office's smoke detector, positioned to capture the entire room. I watched footage of Tony meeting with various people after hours. Meetings that had nothing to do with restaurant supplies. "The restaurant's perfect for this," he told one man in an expensive suit. "Cash business, high turnover. No one looks too closely at the books in places like this." "And your sister?" the man asked. "She's not going to cause problems." Tommy laughed. "Jules, she's too busy with her tech job to pay attention. Besides, she trusts me. They all do." My hands shook as I fast-forwarded through more footage. Money changing hands. Ledgers being altered. Conversations about cleaning cash through the restaurant's accounts. My brother was using our family's beloved restaurant to launder money. Suddenly, his insistence on taking control made perfect sense. His new clothes, his expensive car, his eagerness to get our parents to retire. It was all part of his plan. "Oh, tell me," I whispered to my empty living room. "What have you done?" My phone buzzed. A text from Maria. "Can we meet? There's something you need to know." I stared at the message, then back at my laptop screen where Tony was shaking hands with another sketchy business partner. How many people had suspected something was wrong but been too afraid to speak up? "Corner Cafe, tomorrow morning," I texted back. 7 a.m. I stayed up most of the night, reviewing footage and taking notes. The camera had been recording for months before our parents retired. Dad must have suspected something, installed it secretly. But why hadn't he said anything? Why leave it for me to find? The next morning, Maria was already waiting when I arrived at the cafe, nervously shredding a napkin. I should have called you sooner, she said as soon as I sat down. But Tony, he's changed. He watches everyone, writes up people for tiny mistakes. 3 longtime servers have quit already. How long have you known something was wrong? I asked gently. She glanced around before leaning closer. A few months. The numbers stopped making sense. We're doing the same business we always did, but somehow there's so much more cash. And these men come in, have meetings with Tony after hours. Why didn't you tell my parents? Tony said he was making improvements, modernizing things. Your parents were so excited about retiring, about him taking over. She twisted her wedding ring anxiously. But last week, I overheard something. They were talking about using the restaurant to clean dirty money. When Tommy saw me, he said if I breathed a word to anyone, he'd make sure my son lost his scholarship. My chest tightened. Maria's son Marco was in his first year of medical school, attending on a scholarship Tommy had helped arrange through one of his new business contacts. I found Dad's camera, I told her quietly. I've seen the footage. Her eyes widened. Your father knew. I think he suspected. But I don't understand why he didn't confront Tony directly. Maybe, Maria hesitated. Maybe he wanted you to find it. You're the one who could understand what to do with it. I thought about my father, about how he always encouraged my interest in technology even while Tony mocked it as nerdy. Had he known this moment would come? I need to be careful, I said finally. These people Tony's involved with, they're dangerous. And he has leverage over too many people. Maria nodded, understanding. What are you going to do? I pulled out my phone, showing her an app I created overnight. First, we're going to gather evidence. Real evidence, not just suspicions. I need your help, but it has to look like nothing's changed. Of course, she said without hesitation. Whatever you need. As we planned, I thought about the restaurant, about all the family memories it held. Sunday dinners after closing, birthday celebrations in the kitchen, my nana teaching me her secret recipe for tiramisu. Tommy wasn't just laundering money, he was corrupting everything our parents had built. I wasn't going to let him get away with it. But I had to be smart. One wrong move, and I wouldn't just be risking myself. I'd be putting Maria, Marco, and who knew how many others in danger. I needed more than just the camera footage. I needed to understand exactly what Tony was doing and who he was working with. Most importantly, I needed him to keep underestimating me. Let him think I was just his tech-obsessed sister, too naive to see what was happening right under my nose. He'd learned soon enough just how wrong he was. Over the next 2 weeks, I built my case carefully. The app I created allowed Maria and other trusted staff members to document suspicious activities without risking detection. Every late-night meeting, every unusual cash deposit, every strange supplier who visited Tony's office. It all went into my encrypted database. But the real breakthrough came when I discovered something else in Dad's hidden compartment, a small notebook filled with codes and numbers. At first glance, it looked like random scribbles. But Dad had taught me about ciphers when I was young, one of our many nerdy activities that Tony had never been interested in. It took me 3 days to crack his code, and when I did, I felt sick. Dad hadn't just suspected Tommy's activities, he'd been tracking them for months. The notebook contained detailed records of suspicious transactions, names, dates. He'd been building his own case, but something had stopped him from acting on it. I was in my apartment, cross-referencing Dad's notes with my home data, when my phone buzzed. A text from Tommy. Coming by the restaurant tomorrow? Need to discuss something important. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. In the past 2 weeks, I've visited Bella Rosa several times, playing the role of the oblivious sister perfectly. Tony had grown more relaxed, less defensive about my presence. Sure, I typed back. Lunchtime ok. Perfect, don't be late. I smiled grimly at my laptop screen, where I had footage of his latest business meeting playing. Don't worry, little brother. I wouldn't miss this for the world. The next morning, I backed up everything to multiple secure locations and made 2 important calls. Then I headed to Bella Rosa, the USB drive with the camera footage tucked safely in my pocket. Tony was waiting in his office, looking unusually pleased with himself. Jules, Right on time. You said it was important, I said, taking the seat across from his desk. Everything okay? He leaned back, studying me with what seemed like genuine affection. More than okay. I've been thinking, you were right to be concerned about the restaurant, about our family's legacy. This was new. I kept my expression neutral, waiting. I want to offer you a position here, he continued. Director of Operations. You can handle the technology side, modernize our systems. We'll run it together, like we always talked about as kids. I felt a pang in my chest, remembering those childhood conversations. Once this would have been a dream come true. Working alongside my brother, building on our parents' success. Why now? I asked carefully. Because your family, he said, spreading his hands, and family should stick together. Plus, with your tech skills. He smiled. We could really expand our operations. The emphasis he placed on that last word told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't offering me a legitimate position. He wanted to use my skills to help him launder money more efficiently. That's quite an offer, I said slowly. Mind if I think about it? His smile tightened slightly. Of course, but don't take too long. This is a limited time opportunity. Was that a threat? Knowing what I knew now, probably. I stood up, adjusting my bag. I'll let you know by the end of the week. As I reached the door, he called out, "Oh, and Jules. Let's keep this between us for now. No need to mention it to Mom and Dad." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Outside the office, I took a deep breath, then texted a single word. Ready. Everything happened very quickly after that. As I walked through the kitchen toward the front door, I heard them enter, FBI agents moving swiftly and professionally. Tommy's outraged shouts echoed behind me as I stepped outside, where two people were waiting. Agent Carter, the woman introduced herself, showing her badge. "We got your evidence package. Impressive work." "Will it be enough?" I asked. She nodded. "More than enough. The camera footage alone would do it, but combined with your father's records and the financial data you collected, your brother and his associates are looking at serious time." I closed my eyes briefly, relief warring with sadness. "Keep my father's name out of it, please. He tried to handle it himself, protect the family. That's why he retired when he did, to get my parents away from this mess." "We understand," Agent Carter said gently. "As far as anyone needs to know, the investigation started with anonymous tips from concerned employees." I watched as they led Tony out in handcuffs, his expensive suit wrinkled, his face a mask of fury. Our eyes met, and I saw the moment he realized the truth. "You," he snarled. "My own sister?" "No, Tommy," I said quietly. "You did this. You betrayed everything Mom and Dad built, everything we were supposed to protect together." They put him in a car and drove away. I stood there for a long time, watching the place that had been my childhood home, now surrounded by federal agents and crime scene tape. Maria appeared beside me, tears in her eyes. "What happens now?" "Now," I said, squaring my shoulders, "we clean up his mess. Together." The next few months were a blur of legal proceedings, media coverage, and damage control. The restaurant stayed closed initially, but I refused to let it die. While Tony awaited trial, I worked with the FBI to clear Bella Rosa's name, proving that many of the staff had been unwitting participants in his scheme. I took a leave of absence from my tech job and threw myself into restoring the restaurant. The old staff rallied around me, not just Maria, but the cooks, servers, and busboys who have been part of our extended family for years. The hardest part was telling our parents. Mom cried, but Dad just looked tired. "You found a camera," he said quietly when we were alone. "And my notes." I nodded. "Why didn't you tell me?" He sighed heavily. "I thought I could handle it myself, protect both of you." By the time I realized how deep Tony was in, I was afraid they'd hurt him if I went to the authorities directly. So I left the evidence where I knew you'd find it. Because I'm the nerdy one, I tried to smile. "Because you're the strong one," he corrected. "You always were." Tommy, he wanted easy success, quick money. But you understood what really matters. 6 months after Tony's arrest, we reopened Bella Rosa. The dining room was packed with familiar faces, loyal customers, employees past and present, people who believed in second chances. I stood in the kitchen, watching the organized chaos I remembered from childhood. The smell of garlic and basil still filled the air, but now it felt clean again. Honest. Maria's son Marco, home from medical school for the weekend, was helping serve tables. He'd insisted on keeping his scholarship money, working to pay it back himself rather than letting his mother feel indebted to Tony's corrupt contacts. My parents came back for the reopening. Mom hugged every customer like family, while Dad stood in his old office, my office now, looking at the changes I'd made. The modern art was gone, replaced by family photos. His old football posters were back up, next to my framed computer science degrees. "You've done good, Julia," he said gruffly. "The place feels right again." I thought about Tommy, about the plea deal he'd taken that would keep him in prison for at least 5 years. About the choice I'd made to protect our family's legacy, even at the cost of betraying my own brother. "We'd all make choices," I said finally. "Tommy chose greed. I choose this, our family, our real family." Dad squeezed my shoulder, and together we watched the restaurant buzz with life. This was what success really looked like. Not secret meetings and laundered money, but good food, honest work, and people coming together to share something real. Bella Rosa was more than just a restaurant. It was a testament to the power of choosing right over easy, of protecting what matters most. Tommy had forgotten that, but I never would. Because in the end, true family isn't just about blood. It's about the choices we make and the people we choose to become. I chose to be my father's daughter, my mother's strength, and the guardian of everything they'd built. Not because it was easy, but because it was right. And sometimes that makes all the difference. I'm Emma Jean, and I learned early in life that appearances can be deceiving. Growing up in a modest apartment above my parents' small grocery store, I watched them work tirelessly, saving every penny they could. What our neighbors didn't know was that my parents were silent investors in several successful tech startups, teaching me that true wealth doesn't need to announce itself. "Remember, Emma," my father would say while counting the day's earnings. "Money talks, but wealth whispers." I took those words to heart, excelling in finance and economics while working part-time at our store. By 25, I had my MBA and had quietly built my own investment portfolio worth millions. But I kept my success private, preferring to be underestimated rather than invade. That's how I met Michael. It was a rainy Tuesday at the local coffee shop where I often worked on my laptop, managing my investments while appearing to be just another young professional. Michael rushed in, drenched and frantically checking his watch. "The register's card reader is down," the barista announced apologetically. Michael patted his pockets, realizing he'd left his wallet at home. I noticed his expensive but worn briefcase, a gift from someone special, perhaps, and his kind eyes. "I've got it," I said, stepping up to pay. "Oh no, I couldn't," he started to protest. "Consider it karma," I smiled. "Maybe you can return the favor someday." That favor came in the form of dinner the following week. Michael was charming, genuine, and refreshingly down to earth. He worked as a middle manager at Preston Financial, one of the city's largest investment firms. "It's not the most exciting job," he admitted over pasta, "but it's stable." I liked that he wasn't trying to impress me with false bravado. "Stability is underrated," I replied, thinking of my own carefully managed portfolio. What I didn't mention was that I already owned a significant number of shares in Preston Financial. I've been watching the company for months, noting its potential and its problems. The current management was old school, resistant to necessary technological updates that could streamline their operations. Our relationship blossomed naturally. Michael was kind, honest, and treated everyone with respect, from CEO to janitor. After a year of dating, he proposed with his grandmother's ring. "It's not much," he said nervously, "but it's been in the family for generations." "It's perfect," I assured him, meaning it. The ring's value wasn't in its modest diamond, but in its history of love. Then I met his family, and everything changed. Michael's sister, Catherine, worked as a senior analyst at Preston Financial. She'd fast-tracked her way up through office politics and family connections. From our first meeting, she made it clear she found me lacking. "So, what do you do?" she asked during our first family dinner, wine glass dangling from manicured fingers. "I'm a secretary at Rivera Corp," I said, using my cover job. I did actually work there part-time, mainly to maintain my understanding of day-to-day operations in the finance world. "Oh," Catherine exchanged looks with their mother, Eleanor. "How quaint." Michael always did have a soft spot for charity cases. Michael shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. That silence would become a pattern. After we married, Catherine's disdain grew more obvious. She worked at the same Preston financial branch as Michael, and her comments became more frequent and cutting. You know, she told Michael loudly at the office Christmas party. Sandra from accounting is single now. She's a junior partner, Michael. Much more suitable. I maintained my composure, but Michael's lack of defense stung. He wanted to avoid conflict, he said later. Keep the peace. What they didn't know was that I'd been steadily increasing my stake in Preston Financial. The company needed modernization, and I was positioning myself to make it happen. My cover as a part-time secretary at Rivera Corp allowed me to observe without suspicion. Then came the merger announcement. Preston Financial was joining forces with Rivera Corp, where I supposedly worked as a secretary. The move would double the company's market share, if it succeeded. Catherine was ecstatic, seeing an opportunity for advancement. Finally, a chance to show the board what real talent looks like, she bragged at family dinner. Unlike some people who can barely manage a filing cabinet. Eleanor, my mother-in-law, nodded approvingly. It's important to have ambition, dear. Not everyone is content with mediocrity. Her eyes flickered to me. Michael studied his plate. What they didn't know was that I'd orchestrated the merger through shell companies and careful negotiations. I owned 40% of Rivera Corp, soon to be 40% of the merged Preston Rivera Financial Group. The annual company gala would announce the merger's completion. Catherine insisted on having it at her country club, making sure I knew the usual membership fee. But don't worry, she smiled sweetly, staff can use the service entrance. The night of the gala arrived. I wore a simple black dress, expensive but understated. Catherine sashayed around in designer silk, introducing Michael to more appropriate women. Oh, Emma, she called out loudly as I stood alone near the appetizers. The catering staff needed help in the kitchen. I told them you feel right at home there. Laughter rippled through her circle of sycophants. Michael, across the room, pretended to be engrossed in conversation. That's when Mr. Harrison, the CEO of Rivera Corp, walked in. He spotted me immediately. Mrs. John. He called out warmly. The woman of the hour. Catherine frowned. Excuse me? Mr. Harrison continued. Everyone, I'd like to introduce our new Chief Financial Officer and major shareholder, Emma John. Without her vision for this merger, none of us would be here tonight. The room fell silent. Catherine's champagne glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the marble floor. That's impossible, she stammered. She's a secretary. Oh, I did work at Rivera Corp, I said calmly. Best way to understand a company is from the ground up. But I've also been one of the largest shareholders in both Preston Financial and Rivera Corp for the past 3 years. Eleanor's face had turned an interesting shade of purple. But the country club membership. I've been a member for 5 years, I replied. I'm on the board, actually. Interesting that we never ran into each other, Catherine. Michael pushed through the crowd, his face a mix of shock and something else. Shame, perhaps. Emma, he started. Why didn't you tell me? I met his gaze steadily. Would it have changed anything? Would you have finally stood up to them? Before he could answer, Catherine found her voice. This is ridiculous. I've worked here for 8 years. I've earned my position. About that, Mr. Harrison interjected. Mrs. Zhang has brought some concerning documents to our attention. Something about unauthorized trades under client accounts. Catherine's face went from red to white in an instant. We'll need to discuss this in detail on Monday, he continued. For now, I suggest you enjoy what might be your last company event. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of shocked faces and hasty congratulations. Eleanor and Catherine left early, claiming headaches. Michael kept trying to catch my eye, but I was busy with actual business discussions. Back at home, the silence was deafening. All this time, Michael finally said, "You let them treat you like that." Why? Because I needed to see who people really were, I replied. Money changes how people treat you. I wanted to know if I could count on you to stand by me regardless of my bank account. And did I pass that test? He asked quietly. I looked at him for a long moment. What do you think? The next morning, I headed to my new office early. The weekend security guard did a double take at my upgraded access badge. I was no longer entering through the side entrance as a visiting secretary. My phone had been buzzing nonstop since last night, Dozens of missed calls from Eleanor and Catherine, plus several texts from Michael. Please come home. We need to talk. I know I messed up. Give me a chance to explain. Emma, I love you. Don't throw away our marriage over this. But I had work to do. The audit team had already gathered in the conference room, armed with the evidence I'd been collecting for months. Mrs. John, Mr. Harrison greeted me. Shall we begin? The evidence against Catherine was damning. She'd been running a sophisticated scheme, making unauthorized trades using client funds, skimming profits, and covering her tracks through manipulated records. The amounts were staggering, over $5 million diverted over 3 years. The clients never noticed because she was careful to target dormant accounts, the head auditor explained. Mostly elderly investors who didn't check their statements regularly. My stomach turned. Elderly investors. A quick check confirmed my suspicion. One of the affected accounts belonged to Michael's grandmother, the same one whose ring I wore. Catherine had stolen nearly $200,000 from her own grandmother's retirement fund. As we reviewed the documents, my assistant interrupted. Mrs. John, your mother-in-law is in the lobby. She's causing quite a scene. I sighed, sent her up. Eleanor burst into the conference room, designer handbag swinging wildly. How dare you? You manipulative. Scheming. Mrs. Kennedy, Mr. Harrison cut in sharply. This is a private meeting. Private? Nothing's private anymore, thanks to this gold digger. Do you know what she's done to our family? I met her gaze calmly. Do you know what your daughter has done to your mother-in-law's retirement fund? That stopped her cold. What? I slid the account statement across the table. Eleanor's face paled as she read the numbers. This must be a mistake, she whispered. No mistake, I replied. Catherine stole from her own grandmother and dozens of other retirees. Eleanor sank into a chair, her righteous anger deflating. But she said she was doing so well at work. She was, at fraud. I stood up. The police will be here within the hour. I suggest you get Catherine a good lawyer. As if on cue, Catherine burst into the room, Michael trailing behind her. You can't do this, she shrieked. I've work to do hard. Save it for the police, Mr. Harrison interrupted. They're very interested in your creative accounting. Michael stepped forward. Emma, please. There must be another way. She's my sister. I looked at my husband, really looked at him. And I'm your wife. Or did you forget that every time she humiliated me? I didn't know about any of this. He gestured helplessly at the documents. You didn't want to know, I corrected. Just like you didn't want to see how they treated me. It was easier to stay quiet, wasn't it? Catherine's face had taken on a calculating look. I have dirt on other people too. If I go down. Save your threats. I cut her off. Every trade, every transfer, every doctored document has been traced. Your dirt won't save you from prison. Eleanor began to cry. Think of our family name. Like you thought of your mother's retirement? I asked quietly. She trusted you with her account, Catherine. They all did. The police arrived minutes later. As they led Catherine away in handcuffs, she turned to Michael one last time. Are you really going to let her destroy our family? Michael stood frozen, torn between family loyalty and moral obligation. In that moment, I made my decision. Send the divorce papers to my lawyer, I told him. I'll have my things out by tonight. Emma, wait. He caught my arm. I know I failed you. But please, give me a chance to make it right. I gently removed his hand. You had 3 years of chances. Every time they belittled me, every time they treated me like dirt. Those were chances to stand up for your wife. You chose your side long ago. The aftermath was swift and merciless. Catherine pleaded guilty to multiple counts of fraud and theft. She was sentenced to 8 years in prison in order to repay millions in restitution. Eleanor and Michael's father had to sell their country club membership and downsize their home to help cover Catherine's legal fees. I threw myself into transforming Preston Rivera Financial. We implemented stricter oversight measures, modernized our technology, and established a restitution fund for Catherine's victims. Michael's grandmother was the first to receive full compensation. Months passed. I granted Michael an amicable divorce, even letting him keep the apartment. Some called me too generous, but I remembered the kind man who'd forgotten his wallet that rainy day. He wasn't a bad person, just a weak one. One evening, as I worked late in my office, my assistant announced an unexpected visitor. Michael's grandmother. She walked in slowly, leaning on her cane, my former engagement ring glinting on her thin finger. Michael had returned it to her after our divorce. "I owe you a visit," she said, settling into a chair, "to thank you for protecting my retirement and to apologize." "You have nothing to apologize for," I assured her. "Oh, but I do." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small box. Inside was the engagement ring. "I want you to keep this." "I couldn't possibly." "You protected not just my savings, but my dignity. That's worth more than any ring." She smiled sadly. "Besides, you were always more of a granddaughter to me than Catherine." After she left, I stood at my office window, watching the city lights flicker on. The ring sat on my desk, a reminder that true worth isn't in what we own, but in what we stand for. Eleanor still tries to contact me occasionally, usually when she needs money. Catherine writes from prison, alternating between threats and pleas for help with her appeal. I forward all communication to my lawyers. Michael sent me one final email. "I finally understand what real strength looks like. It's not in keeping the peace, but in standing up for what's right. I'm sorry I learned that lesson too late. Take care of yourself, Emma." I did keep the ring, not as a reminder of what I'd lost, but of what I'd gained: self-respect, clarity, and the knowledge that sometimes the greatest wealth lies in being true to yourself. Last week, I approved a new financial literacy program for seniors, free workshops to help them protect their investments. We named it after Michael's grandmother. It felt right, turning past pain into future protection. The morning sun streams through my office window as I review the latest merger proposals. My father's words echo in my mind. Money talks, but wealth whispers. He was right, but he forgot one thing: integrity roars. And that's a sound that even the highest walls of privilege can't silence.
I never asked to be born, but my parents, Wayne and Abigail Billy, made it painfully clear from the start that I wasn't planned. I'm Madison, the second child they didn't want. My older sister, Amber, was the golden child, the one they dreamed of. Growing up in the Billy house was like living in two separate worlds. Amber's world was full of love, attention, and celebration. Mine, a cold, shadowy place filled with indifference and barely concealed resentment. I still remember my 8th birthday as if it happened yesterday. I woke up hopeful, daring to believe this year might be different. Maybe this time they'd remember, maybe they'd care. But when I came downstairs, my parents were seated at the kitchen table, engrossed in a conversation about Amber's upcoming dance recital. "Morning," I said, trying to keep the hope from my voice. Mom looked up briefly, her expression blank. "Oh, Madison, your cereal's in the cupboard." That was it. No happy birthday, no hug, nothing. Later that evening, at dinner, Dad finally remembered. "Oh, right. Happy birthday, kid," he muttered, not even bothering to look up from his plate. Mom blinked in surprise. "Is that today? I thought it was next week." That night, I lay in bed clutching the only birthday card I received, a small note from Grandma Francesca. Her words were like a lifeline. "My dearest Madison, happy birthday, sweetheart. You bring so much joy to my life. Never forget how special and loved you are. Love always, Grandma." I read the card over and over, desperately trying to believe her words. But how could I feel special when my own parents barely acknowledged my existence? School wasn't much better. Parent-teacher conferences were an endless cycle of disappointment. Other kids' parents showed up, proud and supportive. Mine always had an excuse. "Sorry, Madison," Mom would say, her voice devoid of remorse. "Amber has a dance competition that day. You understand, right?" I'd nod, pretending it didn't hurt, but it always did. The worst moments came late at night when they thought I couldn't hear. Their voices would drift up the stairs, sharp and cruel. "I just don't get it," Dad said one evening. "Amber's so bright and talented. Why can't Madison be more like her?" Mom sighed heavily. "I know. It's like she doesn't even try. Remember how Amber was reading at 4? Madison could barely tie her shoes at that age." Their words carved deep scars into me, each one a reminder that I'd never be good enough. I became quiet and withdrawn, retreating into myself because, really, what was the point of trying? The only person who truly saw me was Grandma Francesca. Every visit to her cozy little house felt like stepping into a different world, a world where I was loved and heard, a world where I could just be. When I was 13, I hit my breaking point. Home had become unbearable, and I knew I couldn't stay. One day, tears streaming down my face, I went to Grandma. "Grandma," I whispered, my voice trembling, Can I live with you?" Her answer was immediate, her embrace warm and unwavering. "Oh, sweetheart, she said, pulling me close. You'll always have a home with me, and one day, everything I have will be yours. I melted into her arms, feeling safe for the first time in years. I didn't care about inheriting anything, I just wanted to feel loved. When my parents found out, their reactions were predictably indifferent. That tiny house? Dad scoffed. She works at a library for peanuts. What could she possibly offer you? Mom just shrugged, relief evident in her voice. Well, if that's what you want, it'll make things easier for us. Their apathy stung, but it also reassured me that I was making the right choice. They didn't value Grandma's love, but I did. Living with Grandma wasn't easy, money was tight, and we often struggled to make ends meet, but none of that mattered. For the first time, I felt cherished. Grandma attended every school event, always sitting in the front row, cheering me on. My drawings covered her fridge, and she'd proudly tell everyone about her brilliant granddaughter. Under her care, I began to thrive. The shy, quiet girl I had been slowly disappeared. I made friends, joined clubs, and my grades improved. Love and support had transformed me. Everything seemed to be falling into place, until one crisp autumn afternoon when Grandma came home looking unusually emotional. Her smile was there, but her eyes brimmed with tears. Madison, sweetheart, she said, her voice trembling, we need to talk. It's about my sister, Marilyn. She passed away. I barely remembered Aunt Marilyn, a wealthy and distant businesswoman. I'm so sorry, Grandma, I said, taking her hand. She squeezed it tightly. There's more, Madison. Marilyn, she left me everything, her entire fortune. We're millionaires now, sweetheart, multimillionaires. The news spread quickly. It didn't take long for my parents to reappear, knocking on our door one evening. When Grandma opened it, there they stood, Wayne and Abigail Billy, their eyes shiny with tears. Francesca, Madison, Mom said, her voice trembling in a way I'd never heard before, we've made a terrible mistake. Dad nodded, looking unusually humble. We've been awful parents, truly awful, but we've realized how wrong we were, and we want to make things right. I stood frozen. The same people who had ignored me for years were now pleading for a second chance. Please, Madison, Mom said, her voice trembling as she reached out to me. Come home. Let us be the family we should have been all along. I turned to Grandma, my heart heavy with uncertainty. She gave me a kind, reassuring smile. It's your decision, sweetheart, she said softly. Whatever you choose, I'll support you. After days of agonizing over it, I decided to give them another chance. With Grandma's blessing, I packed my things and returned to the Billy house. At first, it felt like a dream come true. Mom and Dad were attentive and loving, coming to every school event and cheering me on. They gave me thoughtful gifts, not expensive, but ones that showed they were paying attention to what I liked. We even started having family game nights. I'll never forget the first time Dad ruffled my hair after I won at Monopoly, saying, "That's my girl." The warmth that spread through me was indescribable. The biggest surprise was bedtime. Mom began tucking me in every night, something I'd always dreamed of as a little girl. She'd smooth my hair and kiss my forehead. "Good night, sweetheart," she'd whisper. "We love you so much." Even Amber seemed different. She included me in her plans, introduced me to her friends, and gave me advice about boys and makeup. I wanted so badly to believe it was real, that my family had truly changed and finally saw me for who I was. But a tiny voice in the back of my mind whispered doubts. Why now? Why only after Grandma came into money? I pushed those thoughts aside, determined to enjoy the loving family life I'd always dreamed of. I called Grandma often, excitedly sharing how happy I was. She always sounded glad for me, but there was a hint of caution in her voice. "Just remember, Madison," she'd say gently, "you always have a home with me, no matter what." Life settled into a new routine. Amber, always the golden child, graduated high school with honors and went off to a prestigious college. Grandma moved into a beautiful new house, finally retiring from her job at the library. And me? I was thriving, doing well in school, with close friends, and even dating Caleb, a boy from my chemistry class. One Thursday evening, I had a date with Caleb at the local diner. I spent hours getting ready, changing outfits and redoing my makeup, feeling nervous but excited. But as I sat waiting at the diner, my phone buzzed. "Sorry, Madison, something came up, can't make it tonight." Disappointment sank in, and I left the diner early, heading home. The house was quiet when I arrived, so I used my key to avoid waking anyone. As I walked past Dad's study, I heard voices. I was about to announce my return when Mom's voice stopped me cold. "I don't know how much longer I can keep up this act," she said, her tone sharp with frustration. I never wanted her in the first place, and pretending to love her is exhausting. I froze, my heart hammering. Pretending to love me? Dad's response turned my stomach. We just have to be patient. Once Mom passes, all the money will go to Madison. If we play our cards right, we can convince her to share it with us. Just think of the life we could have. Their words shattered me. Every moment of love and acceptance had been a lie, a calculated performance for Grandma's fortune. Tears welled up as the truth sunk in, crushing the fragile hope I'd been clinging to. I took out my phone and hit record, unable to stop myself from capturing their betrayal. When I couldn't bear to listen any longer, I walked back to the front door, took a deep breath, and slammed it loudly. I'm home, I called out, forcing my voice to sound steady. Mom and Dad appeared almost instantly, their faces plastered with smiles and fake concern. Madison, sweetie, you're back early, Mom said, her brow furrowed in what I now recognized as insincere worry. Everything okay? Yeah, I muttered. Caleb canceled. Something came up. Their reactions were perfect, too perfect. Mom clicked her tongue sympathetically, and Dad gave me a reassuring pat on the shoulder. I had to fight the urge to recoil from his touch. That night, I lay awake for hours, their cruel words replaying in my mind. By morning, I had made my decision. After they left the house, I packed a duffel bag with my clothes and a few meaningful keepsakes. Without looking back, I left the Billy house and went straight to Grandma's. When she opened the door and saw me standing there with my bag, her eyes widened. Madison, what's wrong, sweetheart? I couldn't hold it in any longer. Tears poured down my face as I pulled out my phone and played the recording. As Grandma listened, her expression shifted, shock, disbelief, and finally, a deep, simmering anger. Those conniving, heartless, she stopped herself, taking a deep breath before looking at me with soft, loving eyes. Don't you worry, honey, we'll give them a surprise they'll never forget. She pulled me into a tight hug, and for the first time since hearing that awful conversation, I felt safe. That evening, my phone buzzed incessantly, calls and messages from Mom, Dad, and even Amber. At first, I ignored them, but eventually, I answered. Hello, I said, my voice cold. Madison, Mom's frantic voice came through. Where are you? We've been so worried. I almost laughed at the irony. I'm with Grandma, I replied calmly, and we'd like to invite you all over tomorrow for a family conversation. There was a long silence before Mom stammered. Of course, we'll be there, Madison. Honey, whatever's wrong, we'll fix it. I hung up before she could continue. Fix it? They had no idea what was coming. The next evening, the air was heavy with tension as the doorbell rang. Grandma gave my hand a reassuring squeeze before answering. Wayne and Abigail Billy stepped inside, their faces full of fake concern and affection. Madison, sweetheart, Mom began, reaching out to me. I stepped back, watching confusion flicker across her face. Grandma's voice was calm but firm. Please, have a seat, we have a lot to discuss. As they sat down, Dad's eyes darted around, taking in the signs of wealth. Mom, what's this about? Is everything okay? Without a word, I placed my phone on the table and pressed play. Their voices filled the room, cold, calculating, and damning. The effect was immediate. The color drained from their faces as they sat, wide-eyed and speechless. When the recording ended, the silence was deafening. Then they both began speaking at once, their voices a jumble of excuses and apologies. Grandma raised her hand, silencing them. When she spoke, her voice trembled with disappointment and barely controlled anger. I hoped, truly believed, that you had changed, she said, her words deliberate and heavy. The realization was a tidal wave, washing over my parents as Grandma delivered her verdict. I had considered dividing my estate among all of you, she said, her voice unwavering, but now I see clearly, everything I have will go to Madison, alone. Their faces fell, struck by the full weight of her words. Panic flickered in their eyes as the reality of their failed scheme set in. It wasn't just the money they'd lost, but also any chance of being part of a family grounded in love and trust. Please, you have to understand, Mom's voice cracked, tears streaming down her face. We made mistakes, but we love Madison. We can fix this. She reached out, desperation etched into every word. When begging failed to soften Grandma's resolve, their tone turned venomous. Dad's face twisted with fury. You can't do this. We're her parents, we have rights. We'll make sure you never see her again, Francesca. Their threats didn't faze me. For the first time, I felt a calm certainty about what I needed to do. I'm filing for emancipation, I said, my voice steady. Grandma will be my legal guardian. You won't have any control over me anymore." The shock on their faces would have been almost comical if it weren't so tragic. They looked between me and Grandma, realization dawning that their carefully laid plans had not just crumbled, they had completely backfired. "I think it's time for you to leave," Grandma said firmly, her tone brooking no argument. She stood and gestured toward the door. After a moment of hesitation, they left, their defeat palpable. When the door closed behind them, I released a shaky breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Grandma enveloped me in a warm hug, and for the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of peace. The weeks following the confrontation were a whirlwind of legal proceedings. Grandma hired the best lawyers to help secure my emancipation and transfer guardianship to her. I had naively believed my parents would step aside once their deceit was exposed. I was wrong. Wayne and Abigail fought bitterly to retain control, clinging to the hope of accessing Grandma's wealth. But the evidence against them was overwhelming. Years of neglect and emotional abuse became the foundation of our case. Teachers from my schools testified about their absence, how they never came to parent-teacher conferences or attended my school events. My third-grade teacher, Mrs. Randy, recounted the time I won the spelling bee, and no one from my family showed up to celebrate. Even neighbors came forward, painting a stark contrast between the extravagant parties my sister Amber enjoyed and my overlooked birthdays. The final hearing came quickly. To my surprise, Amber walked into the courtroom, slipping quietly into the back. When she took the stand, her testimony dismantled the last remnants of my parents' defense. "Yes, Your Honor," Amber said, her voice calm and deliberate. "I knew about my parents' plan to use Madison to gain access to Grandma's money. The sudden kindness, the sisterly bonding, it was all part of the act." The courtroom buzzed with whispers. I sat frozen, struggling to process her words. She met my gaze briefly, and for a moment, I thought I saw regret in her eyes. But it was too late. Her admission was the final blow, severing any hope of reconciliation. The judge's decision was swift and unequivocal. Grandma was granted full guardianship, and I was emancipated from Wayne and Abigail Billy. As we left the courthouse, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. For the first time in my life, I was free. The mansion I now called home became more than just a physical refuge, it was a sanctuary where I could heal and rebuild. Grandma's love was a constant, her encouragement a beacon as I navigated my new life. I poured myself into my studies, no longer burdened by the need to prove my worth to indifferent parents. For the first time I was living for myself. Grandma supported me in every way she could, offering opportunities one had only dreamed of. But it was her unwavering belief in me that truly changed my life. "You can be anything you want to be, Madison," she'd say, her eyes sparkling with pride. "The world is yours." Together, we traveled the globe. In England, I fell in love with art and architecture. On a safari in Africa, I discovered a passion for wildlife photography. Each experience unearthed new facets of myself, helping me grow into the person I was always meant to be. But the most transformative work happened in the quiet office of Dr. Lucas, my therapist. Twice a week, I unpacked years of pain and learned to navigate my emotions. "It's okay to be angry," she told me once. "It's okay to grieve the family you should have had." Slowly, I began to trust again, not just others, but myself. The night before my high school graduation, Grandma and I sat on the patio, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink. She reached over and took my hand, her expression tender. "I'm so proud of you, Madison. You've been through so much, and look at you now, you're stronger and more beautiful than ever." Tears welled in my eyes, but this time, they were tears of joy. "I couldn't have done it without you, Grandma. You saved me." She shook her head with a gentle smile. "No, sweetheart. You saved yourself. I just gave you the space to do it." The next day, as I stood on the stage accepting my diploma, I heard Grandma's cheers above everyone else's. A wave of peace washed over me. My past no longer defined me. Instead, it had forged me into someone stronger, ready to embrace the future. Looking out at the crowd, my eyes met Grandma's. In that moment, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, I wouldn't face them alone.
I never intended to hide my success. Growing up in a modest Boston family, I learned early on that humility and perseverance mattered more than status. My father, a mechanic, would return home with grease-stained hands and a weary smile, while my mother worked back-to-back shifts as a nurse, determined to put me through college. Emily, she'd often say, success isn't measured by what you own, it's defined by who you are. Her words stayed with me. By 23, I had started a tech consulting firm in my garage. 2 years later, it had grown into MTech Solutions, now worth over $200 million. Yet, I kept a low profile, preferring the quiet satisfaction of working behind the scenes. Then I met Michael. Our paths crossed at a neighborhood coffee shop. I was absorbed in reviewing contracts, dressed in my usual jeans and sweater, when he accidentally knocked over my coffee. "Oh no, I'm so sorry," he exclaimed, fumbling to save my papers. I couldn't help but laugh. "It's fine," I reassured him, even though those documents were acquisition agreements worth millions. His genuine panic was oddly charming. "Let me make it up to you," he insisted. "I'm Michael, by the way." "Emily," I said, smiling. "And sure, I'll take you up on that coffee." That coffee turned into dinner, and dinner turned into a relationship. Michael was unlike anyone I'd ever met, kind, down to earth, and a high school teacher who genuinely loved his job. He never asked about my wealth, mainly because he didn't know about it. I told him I worked as an executive assistant at MTech Solutions. It wasn't entirely untrue. I did oversee administrative tasks, though as the company's owner, not an assistant. I wanted to be loved for who I was, not what I had. Things were perfect until I met his mother, Victoria. Victoria Patterson was the picture of social ambition. Her home was filled with imitation designer goods, and her conversations revolved around imaginary connections to high society. From the start, she disapproved of me. "A secretary?" she asked during our first dinner, her tone sharp. "Michael, darling, wasn't there a surgeon's daughter I introduced you to?" "Mom," Michael said, clearly annoyed, but she pressed on. "I just think, given our family status, you should aim higher. The Pattersons have always married well." The irony wasn't lost on me. Michael had already shared the truth of their middle-class life, propped up by credit card debt and appearances. "I like my job," I replied simply. "It's fulfilling." Victoria sniffed dismissively. "Well, someone has to do those things, I suppose." Her passive-aggressive remarks became a fixture of family gatherings. At Christmas, while others received thoughtful gifts, I got a plain office planner. "For keeping your boss's schedule," she said with a smirk. Michael often apologized privately but never confronted her outright. I understood. Family dynamics can be tricky. Then came the announcement that changed everything. One Sunday dinner, Victoria stormed into the room, brandishing a newspaper. "MTech Solutions is looking for a new CEO. This is my chance." I nearly choked on my wine. While it was true we were seeking a CEO, the search was highly selective. "You're applying?" Michael asked, visibly surprised. "Of course. After 20 years in middle management, it's time I moved into the big leagues," she declared, turning to me. "Emily, put in a good word for me, would you? Though I doubt your recommendation carries much weight." I maintained a neutral expression. "I'll see what I can do." "Don't bother," she said with a wave. "I've already called in favors. The board will be impressed by my credentials." Little did she know, I was the board. The following week, Victoria arrived at MTech Solutions for her interview, dressed in an over-the-top suit. I watched from my private office as she loudly proclaimed her qualifications in the lobby. "Mrs. Patterson," my assistant called. "The board is ready for you." Victoria straightened her posture and marched into the conference room. She froze the moment she saw me seated at the head of the table, flanked by board members. "Emily," she sputtered. "What are you doing here?" "Running my company," I said evenly. "Please have a seat." Her face paled as the realization hit. This can't be." "It is," one board member confirmed. "Ms. Walker is our founder and majority shareholder." Victoria's carefully curated facade began to crumble. She stumbled into a chair as I opened her application file. "Let's discuss your qualifications," I said, my tone all business. Her resume was riddled with embellishments, and I questioned each one. Her fabricated achievements and supposed connections unraveled quickly under scrutiny. "I think we're done here," I concluded. Your application is disqualified due to misrepresentation. You can't do this, she cried. This is personal. No, it's professional, I replied. But since you brought up personal matters, yes, I've endured your insults and condescension for months. This isn't revenge, Victoria. It's accountability. She stormed out, muttering threats about exposing me to Michael. Go ahead, I thought, already reaching for my phone. It was time Michael knew the truth. Mom just called me crying, Michael said as he walked into my office, his face a mixture of confusion and concern. She said, "You're her boss? Emily, what's going on?" I motioned for him to sit down, taking a deep breath. Michael, there's a lot I need to explain. I wasn't completely honest about who I am. I didn't want to complicate things between us, but now it's unavoidable. Can I show you something? Minutes later, Michael stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows in my office, his eyes scanning the breathtaking view of the city and the nameplate on my desk, Emily Walker, founder and CEO. He turned to the wall of awards and newspaper articles featuring my company MTech Solutions. So, you're not a secretary, he said, his voice measured. No, I'm not, I admitted, standing beside him. I founded MTech when I was 23, the company your mom mocked me for working at. I built it from the ground up. He looked at me, hurt flashing in his eyes. Why would you hide something like this? Why lie? I wanted someone to see me, not my bank account, I said. Do you know how many people have tried to get close to me because of my money or status? I wanted to experience love for who I am, not for what I own. Michael sighed, his expression softening. I understand that, but you let my mother treat you horribly. You could have stopped this months ago. And what would that have accomplished? I asked. Proving her obsession with status, right? That wealth is what defines someone's value. I didn't want to play her game. Michael ran a hand through his hair. You're right. I should have defended you. I failed you there. Before I could respond, the office door burst open, and Victoria stormed in, dragging her husband George behind her. Her face was red with fury. There she is, the liar, the manipulator, she screeched. George, ever the quiet observer, stepped forward. Emily, this feels inappropriate. Using your position to reject Victoria over personal disagreements. I recorded the entire interview, I said, cutting him off. With the press of a button, Victoria's stumbling responses played over the speaker. This wasn't personal. Your wife lied on her application and misrepresented her qualifications. The board made their decision based on facts. Victoria's face twisted with rage. You think you've won? Just wait until everyone hears about this. The so-called genius CEO who pretended to be a secretary just to trick her way into our family. Mom, stop. Michael's voice thundered, silencing the room. Just stop. Do you hear yourself? You're humiliating all of us. Humiliating? She's the liar here. Victoria spat. No, Michael said firmly. Emily lied about one thing, her job. You've lied about everything else. Our family status, your connections, your accomplishments. It's all been a facade, and I'm done enabling it. Victoria's mouth fell open, and George placed a hand on her shoulder. Let's go, Victoria, he murmured. This has gone too far. This isn't over, she hissed as he led her out. You'll regret this, both of you. As the doors slammed behind them, silence filled the office. Michael turned to me, his face weary but resolute. I'm sorry for everything my family's put you through, but I need to know, where do we go from here? Before I could answer, my assistant buzzed in. Ms. Walker, sorry to interrupt, but Mrs. Patterson is in the lobby, causing a scene. Security is asking how to proceed. Michael and I exchanged a look. We handle it together, he said. I pressed the intercom, send security footage to my laptop and stand by. Only intervene if she disrupts operations. On the screen, we watched Victoria pacing the lobby, stopping employees to rant about me. Most ignored her, some rolling their eyes. But then she pulled out her phone. She's stealing clients, Victoria shouted, waving the phone in the air. I have proof right here, financial documents from Patterson Insurance. My blood ran cold. Those are confidential. How did she get them? Michael's face paled. She works in middle management at Patterson. She must have accessed the files. I was already dialing. Mr. Patterson, this is Emily Walker, your employee, Victoria Patterson, is in my lobby threatening to expose confidential client information. Yes, I'll hold. Victoria's voice blared over the feed. I'll ruin her. She's been poaching our best clients. A sharp voice cut through the chaos on the screen. Victoria Patterson. A poised woman in a suit approached, flanked by two men. I'm Susan Chen, legal counsel for Patterson Insurance. You're hereby suspended pending investigation for violation of your non-disclosure agreement and attempted corporate espionage. Victoria stumbled back. No, you don't understand. We understand perfectly, Susan said coldly. Your access to confidential files has been monitored for weeks. This public outburst only confirmed our suspicions. Michael watched in stunned silence as his mother was escorted away, her protest growing fainter. He turned to me. Emily, I didn't know she was capable of this. It's not your fault, I said gently, but we need to address this openly, with your family, with mine, and with ourselves. Michael nodded, his voice steady. Together. As security led a stunned Victoria out of the building, Michael turned to me, his brow furrowed. You knew about her job performance? I found out during the merger discussions, I admitted. I planned to help her transition into a role better suited to her skills. That's part of why I kept my identity hidden. I needed to fully understand the situation before making decisions that would impact your family. Mr. Patterson, standing nearby, shook his head with a faint smile. Always thinking of others, Emily. It's one of the reasons I agreed to the merger in the first place. He straightened his jacket and added, Don't worry about Victoria. We'll handle the legal aspects with discretion for Michael's sake. After he left, silence settled in the office. Michael sat across from me, staring out the window, lost in thought. I need some time, he said at last. This is a lot. I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady. Take all the time you need. At the door, he paused, looking back at me. For what it's worth, I fell in love with Emily the secretary. Knowing you're Emily the CEO doesn't change that. It just means I have more to learn about you. After he left, I remained at my desk, watching the city lights flicker on as night fell. My phone buzzed. A message from George, Michael's father. Victoria's home, devastated. She knows what she's lost. When you're ready, we should talk. All of us. Family shouldn't end like this. The week that followed, I buried myself in work, giving Michael and his family the space they needed. Meanwhile, the media caught wind of Victoria's public meltdown. Corporate espionage involving two merging companies was too scandalous to ignore. Fortunately, both companies' PR teams managed to keep the damage under control. One late evening, as I was reviewing merger documents, my assistant buzzed in. Ms. Walker, the Patterson family is here to see you. They entered together, George leading with calm authority, Michael, his expression unreadable, and finally Victoria, her usual confidence replaced by a tentative, vulnerable air. She wore simple business attire, a stark contrast to her usual designer wardrobe. Emily, George began, his tone measured. We need to talk. All of us. Victoria stepped forward, wringing her hands. I've been in therapy this past week, intensive sessions. Losing the promotion, it broke me. Everything I built my identity around, my importance, my connections, it all crumbled. You tried to hold on by grabbing more, I said quietly. She nodded, tears pooling in her eyes. When I saw the CEO posting, I convinced myself I deserved it, that everyone else had been holding me back. Then learning the truth about you, it shattered what little I had left. Mom, Michael said gently, placing a hand on her shoulder, there's more you need to tell her. Victoria took a shaky breath. I've struggled for years. Shopping addiction, fabricating stories about our family's status. It all started when George's business hit trouble a decade ago. Instead of facing reality, I created a fantasy. It felt easier than admitting we weren't who I pretended us to be. George spoke up, his voice heavy with regret. And I enabled it. I thought keeping up appearances would keep us afloat. But it only made things worse. The merger, is it still happening? I nodded. Yes. Victoria's actions hurt both companies, but they don't erase 2 decades of service. The merger includes a retirement package for long-term employees. It's hers if she wants it. Victoria's eyes widened in disbelief. After everything I've done? Everyone deserves a second chance, I said. But there are conditions. Continued therapy, working with HR on a transition plan, and most importantly, honesty. with yourself and others. Victoria broke down, her carefully constructed walls finally crumbling. I'm sorry, Emily, for everything. For how I treated you, the things I said. Michael moved to my side and took my hand. We've all learned something, he said. Mom about honesty, Dad about enabling, me about standing up for what's right, and Emily about trusting people with the truth. I finished, moving forward. 2 months later, Victoria retired quietly. The merger proceeded smoothly, and she found new purpose volunteering at a financial literacy program, helping others avoid the mistakes she'd made. At her wedding the following spring, she gave a heartfelt speech that left few dry eyes. A year ago, I thought status and appearances were everything, but my daughter-in-law taught me that true worth lies in how you treat others. Emily, thank you for giving our family a second chance, not because you're a CEO, but because you're a compassionate human being. Michael squeezed my hand under the table. We had rebuilt our relationship on a foundation of truth, moving past lies and pretenses. Looking around, I saw our merged family, George chatting with my father about business, Victoria helping my mother arrange flowers, our employees meeting with relatives. Success, I realized, meant nothing without people to share it with. Happy, Michael whispered. Very, I replied with a grin. Though I do miss that secretary desk sometimes. He laughed. Well, you did say your assistant's going on maternity leave. Don't tempt me, I teased. I might just go undercover again. Victoria overheard and joined our laughter, genuine this time, free from pretense. She'd found something far more valuable than status. Peace with who she truly was. As the celebration continued, I thought back to that first accidental coffee spill. It had led to this moment, proving that sometimes life's biggest blessings come disguised as chaos. Looking around at the people I loved, I knew success wasn't measured in dollars or titles. It was measured in second chances, hard truths, and the courage to be authentically yourself.
Hello, my name is Michelle, and I'm 63 years old. My husband passed away about 6 years ago, but I'm still working. I have 2 children, and 5 of my grandkids live in different states across the country. They each have their own families, and I feel truly blessed to have such a large family. One of my kids, Kyle, still lives in our hometown. He went to the local community college where he met his wife, Julie. I liked Julie well enough, but I didn't feel my opinion mattered as long as Kyle was happy. They got married shortly after and continued their education, each pursuing careers in their fields. Once they were both settled in their jobs, they decided to start a family, and I was thrilled at the thought of having another grandchild to spoil. However, Julie set strict boundaries when it came to visits. She controlled when I could visit and how long I could stay. While I understood this when Daniel, their first child, was a baby, it never really changed, even when he was 5. I tried not to let it bother me, thinking every family is different. Over the next 15 years, I didn't get to spend as much time with Daniel as I would have liked. We never grew as close as I had hoped, but we did share a love for books, so I always bought him books when I visited. One day at work, I received an unexpected call from Daniel. This was unusual, since we rarely spoke outside of family gatherings. I did my best to connect with him, as I had with my other grandchildren, but he seemed distant. "Grandma, are you free to talk?" he asked. "Of course, honey, anytime." "Is everything okay?" "No, no." "Why are you crying? Did you get hurt? Is anyone at home who can help you?" "Mom and Dad are here, but, do you need me to call them for you?" "No. I called you because I need your help." "My help? What's going on, darling?" "I need you to save me, Grandma." "Save you? What do you mean?" "She's not as sweet and nice as she acts. She's really mean to me when no one else is around." Suddenly, I heard someone coming up the stairs. "I have to go. Please don't tell them I called. Bye." I was left shocked and confused. As far as I knew, Julie was one of the kindest people. How could Daniel say such things about her? I didn't want to believe him at first. Maybe he was upset over something like being grounded. Daniel had always been a bit mischievous, according to both Julie and Kyle. But something in my gut told me he wasn't joking. The call haunted me for days, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. After some time, I decided to buy a hidden camera. I felt uneasy about spying, but I convinced myself that if Daniel trusted me enough to call, I owed it to him to help. If I found nothing, I'd just remove the camera. But if there was something wrong, I'd figure out what to do next. I hoped it would be a simple misunderstanding, and a long talk would set everything right. The camera arrived a few days later, and I set it up, glad to see it had both live and recorded footage that I could access through an app on my phone. After making sure everything was in place, I called Kyle. "Hello, sweetie. How's everything?" "Everything's great, Mom. What about you?" Same old, same old. I was wondering if I could come by one day. We haven't seen each other in a while." "Of course. How about this Sunday?" "That works, but should I check with Julie if it's okay? I used to hate it when Dad made plans without asking me. But don't worry, Julie will be happy to have you over." "See you then, Mom. I'll be there around 6 o'clock. I was glad to be going to Kyle's, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had other motives now. I was still excited to spend time with my son. It wasn't often that I got to see my family, so it felt special to have one of my children living in the same town. The weekend arrived quickly, and I made sure to get ready early. I decided to bring something along, so I went to the grocery store to pick up a nice bottle of wine and bought a couple of books for Daniel, knowing how much he loved to read. When I arrived at Kyle's house, I was warmly greeted by all three of them. But it was Daniel's look that caught my attention. He stared at me with such a sense of relief that I couldn't help but feel concerned again. Since that first phone call, I hadn't heard from him, so I had no idea what was going on. I spent the next couple of hours chatting with Kyle and Julie. We had dinner, drank wine, and enjoyed each other's company. At some point, Daniel excused himself and went to his room, likely because we were talking about things that didn't interest him. I decided to go and spend time with him. Julie tried to subtly stop me, but I insisted. I hadn't visited in a long time, and I wanted to spend some one-on-one time with my grandson. Kyle told Julie to let me go, and I headed up to Daniel's room. Once inside, I closed the door behind me. I walked over to him and handed him the books I had brought. We talked about them for a while, and since he seemed excited, I let him ramble on. I didn't bring up what he had mentioned during our phone call earlier. I wanted him to talk about it if he was ready, not push him. Our conversation shifted to other topics, like what was going on in our lives. While he was telling me about his school and other things, he grabbed a notebook and wrote something in it. When he showed it to me, it said, "Mom's listening. Can't talk about anything." I couldn't tell if he was serious or just paranoid, but I went along with it. We continued talking, and I quietly wrote my plan in the notebook. I told him I had brought a hidden camera and asked if I could set it up in his room. He quickly agreed. I found a good spot to place the camera, one that gave me a clear view of the room. After starting the recording, I checked my phone to make sure the camera was working. I sat with Daniel a little longer, then told him it was getting late and I needed to head home. Before leaving, I purposely left my scarf behind as an excuse to return if needed. As I headed downstairs, I heard footsteps quickly moving away from the door, which made me wonder if Daniel was right all along. I hugged him goodbye, said my farewells to Kyle and Julie, and then went home. That night, I was tired but couldn't resist checking the footage from the camera. I stayed up for an hour, watching it, just in case something happened. Kyle walked into Daniel's room and asked what we had talked about, and Daniel told him. That was it. I finally went to bed, exhausted from the day. The next morning, I rushed to work and didn't check the camera again until I knew Daniel would be back from school. Again, there was nothing of concern, and I started to think maybe Daniel had been lying, but I decided to give it one more day. If I didn't find anything, I would visit when neither Kyle nor Julie was home and ask Daniel to give me the camera back. That night, as I watched the footage while reading, I finally discovered what Daniel had been trying to tell me. Julie entered the room with a stick in her hand, with Kyle following behind her. I quickly unmuted the video. Julie asked Daniel what he had done all day and made him describe everything in extreme detail. Whenever he stuttered, she sharply asked if he was lying. If she suspected he was, she made him hold out his palms and hit his knuckles 3 to 5 times with the stick. I watched in growing horror as Julie hit Daniel more and more frequently. Daniel was sobbing, and Kyle just stood there, Watching, I was filled with a deep sense of disappointment and disgust. I had raised my children gently, believing that kids are smarter than we often give them credit for. They can understand when things are explained to them. I couldn't understand why Kyle just stood by, letting his son get hit for no reason. I wanted to rush over and stop them, but what would I say? It would be strange for me to show up again, just a day after my last visit. Then I remembered that I had left my scarf there, which could be the perfect excuse to go back, but I needed to wait another day, to make sure I could see Daniel again. I quickly grabbed my phone and called Kyle. Hey, Mom, is everything okay? Yes, no worries. I hope I'm not disturbing you. No, Julie and I were just saying goodnight to Daniel. Alright then, I just wanted to tell you that I think I left my scarf in Daniel's room last night. I remember setting it down and forgot to pick it up. Do you think I could swing by tomorrow to grab it? Why don't I just bring it over now? No, I'm too tired. I'm about to fall asleep. It's been a long day at work, and I can barely hold the phone right now. Alright then, how about tomorrow evening? I can't. I have a game night with friends tomorrow. Well, Julie and I won't be back until the evening. Why don't you come by the day after? I really need that scarf for tomorrow. We're having a gathering. Okay, you could come by in the afternoon. Daniel will be home. Lovely, I'll be there around 3. Good night, Mom. My heart raced as I ended the call. I'd come up with a lie on the spot, but at least my call had distracted Kyle and Julie enough for them to focus on what I said rather than continuing to hurt Daniel. Before they left Daniel's room, I heard Julie tell him that he wouldn't be getting any food until dinner the next day. I was appalled, but sadly, I knew they would follow through with it. The next day, I took the day off from work and prepared myself for the conversation with Daniel. I was sure he wouldn't want to stay there, but I needed to hear it from him. I stopped to pick up some food on the way over. When I arrived, Daniel looked like he might faint. He was weak and exhausted. Julie had really made him go without food. I quickly gave him the food, and he devoured it, eating with a desperation that broke my heart. I felt so sorry for him, but I knew I had to help make things better. When he finished eating, I spoke to him softly. I'm so sorry, sweetheart. Did you see everything that happened? Yes, darling. I'm so sorry I didn't know. I had no idea. It's okay. Mom seems like the nicest person, but has she always been this way? The beatings only started recently, but the starving has been going on for a while. I don't understand why Kyle isn't doing anything. He's too scared of Mom. He just follows her, does everything she says, everything she wants, she gets. Honey, I'm so sorry you've been dealing with this, but I need to understand, why didn't you eat anything at school? Mom doesn't send me to school on days she doesn't let me eat. I stay home. Mom measures the food in the house, and if even a little bit is missing when she gets back, I get punished more. So she's starving you and hurting your education? I'm going to do my best to help you, okay? I need you to tell me right now, if you want to come live with me, I'll take care of everything, and I'll keep you away from Mom and Dad. Of course, Grandma, anywhere away from here would be great. I promise I'll be good, just please take me away. I promise I will, darling, but it'll take some time. Can you handle staying here a little longer? Yeah, I can. I've been here for 15 years, so I can wait a bit more. I carefully took away all the wrappers and made sure there were no traces of food left behind. I didn't want Julie to make things worse for Daniel. We cleaned up the crumbs and double-checked the room to make sure it looked just as it had before. Afterward, I went home and called Kyle to thank him for being cooperative and letting me pick up my scarf. I reached out to a good friend who worked in family law and explained the situation. He told me that fighting for custody would be a long, difficult battle. While I might be able to secure temporary custody, Julie could change her behavior and regain custody with little evidence. It seemed that the odds were against me, but I had a plan. I could use the evidence I had gathered to make Julie agree to let me become Daniel's legal guardian. Julie worked as a counselor at a middle school, and I knew she wouldn't want her child abuse becoming public, as it would ruin her career prospects. I continued to monitor the footage carefully, gathering more evidence and preparing the necessary paperwork for a guardianship transfer. I waited until the weekend to visit Kyle without giving notice. When Kyle opened the door, he seemed surprised. Mom, what are you doing here? I need to talk to you. Julie appeared at the top of the stairs, and Kyle hesitated. I don't think now's a good time. Why, what's going on? Just family stuff. Why are you suddenly visiting so often? Can't I visit my son? I didn't think I needed special permission for that. No, I didn't mean it like that. It's just that you've taken an interest in us this week, And it's a bit weird since you rarely drop by. It's not weird. I only came over today because I have something very important to talk about with you both. As we spoke, I heard loud crying coming from Daniel's room. I could tell something was wrong, so I pushed past Kyle and entered the house. I couldn't just stand by. I rushed straight to Daniel's room. Bursting through the door, Daniel was sobbing, clutching his face, while Julie stood there, breathing heavily, glaring at him with such malice that it sent a shiver down my spine. I immediately ran to Daniel and asked if he was okay. He hugged me tightly and wailed into my ear. Julie huffed and walked away without saying a word. As Daniel calmed down, I saw his cheek was red and swollen, his knuckles were bleeding, and there were welts on his arms from the stick. A deep rage built inside me. How could anyone hit a child so violently? No child deserved that. I went downstairs to the kitchen, grabbed a bag of frozen veggies, and brought it back to Daniel to help reduce the swelling on his cheek. Once he seemed stable, I told him that I would take him with me. I asked him to pack as many things as he could, and then I went downstairs to confront Julie and Kyle. Julie looked furious, and Kyle seemed like he wanted to disappear. How dare you barge into our home like this? Well, isn't it a good thing I did? You were hitting your child. What happens in my family is none of your business. Your child is my grandson, and he's part of my family too. You're hurting him, and I can't let that continue. He may be your grandson, but you don't live with him. You don't know what a brat he is. I'm just disciplining him. Who cares if he's a brat? He's a child, and there are many other ways to discipline a child without hitting them. You of all people should know this. I don't believe in that gentle parenting nonsense. Leave me and my family alone. I'm afraid I can't do that. I handed Julie the papers to transfer guardianship to me. Both she and Kyle stared at the papers, confused. You both have to sign, or I'll release proof of you hitting Daniel. What do you mean by proof? I set up a hidden camera in Daniel's room last week. I have all the proof I need. Neither of your jobs will appreciate what you've done, especially you, Julie. If you want to keep your career intact, I suggest you sign those papers. You were spying on us? That's a gross violation of our privacy. I only acted on information I had. I needed to make sure Daniel was safe. Mom, don't do this to us. Give us another chance. I'll make sure it doesn't happen again. I don't want to hear it. I'm very disappointed in you, Kyle. I raised you to be better than this. You're just as guilty as Julie, if not more. I'm taking Daniel with me, and I expect these papers to be signed. If not, you know what will happen. They didn't put up a fight. As Daniel and I left, I took him to get dinner and ice cream, trying my best to comfort him. I gave him a safe space to share his feelings without fear. In the following weeks, I was granted legal guardianship of Daniel. Julie and Kyle claimed they planned to move to a different state and didn't want to disrupt Daniel's education, which they used as the reason for transferring guardianship. They did end up moving, and I was relieved. Daniel is doing much better now. He's happier knowing he won't run into his parents for a long time. He's one of the kindest and sweetest kids I know, and he thanks me every day for what I did for him. I intend to keep my promise to always protect him. Thank you for listening. My name is Rachel Palmer, and I'm 37 years old. Just last week, I attended a professional gala where I was being honored for my work in research and education. It was a night I'd anticipated for weeks, a celebration of everything I'd built over the years, but as fate would have it, the moment I stepped into the restroom to catch my breath, I came face to face with someone I hadn't seen in nearly 15 years, my mother. She was standing at the sink, reapplying her lipstick, every bit the poised socialite I remembered. For a fleeting moment, I wondered if she'd recognize me. But then her eyes flicked up to the mirror, locking onto my reflection. Her hand froze mid-motion, and I saw her jaw tighten. Rachel, she said, her voice cool and detached, as if we'd run into each other at a country club instead of a restroom after 15 years of silence. I didn't expect to see you here. I steadied myself, gripping the edge of my clutch. I could say the same. I replied evenly. What brings you here? She turned to face me, her posture as rigid as ever. Your father and I were invited. Of course, we've always supported organizations focused on education. And you? She added, her tone laced with mild curiosity. I'm being honored tonight, I said, meeting her gaze, for my work in research. Her expression barely shifted, but I caught a flicker of surprise in her eyes before she masked it. I see, she said, turning back to the mirror. Well, I suppose everyone finds their way eventually. Her words pulled me back to the day I left that house for the last time. I was 19. And the years leading up to that moment had been anything but easy. In high school, I'd struggled with depression, but in our family, admitting that wasn't an option. What could you possibly be sad about? My mother had said when I once tried to confide in her. Her voice was dripping with irritation. You have everything, more than most kids your age. Stop making excuses. But the truth was, I had been drowning. The pressure to live up to the Palmer name was suffocating. By junior year, my grades were slipping. By senior year, I was barely hanging on. My parents didn't see a teenager in need of help. They saw a failure, an embarrassment. When I only got into a community college, my father's fury was unmatched. This family has standards, he'd said that night, pacing the living room while I stood clutching my acceptance letter. And you've done nothing but drag us down. You want to waste your life? Fine, but you'll do it on your own. I was kicked out that night. I can still feel the weight of the duffel bag I carried as I left the house, filled not just with clothes, but the heavy reality of being completely on my own. My parents didn't even say goodbye. My mother remained seated on the couch, scrolling through her phone as if I were invisible. My father disappeared into his study, his ultimatum already delivered. For the first few weeks, I crashed on a friend's pull-out couch while I figured out my next steps. Community college wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I worked part-time at a diner to cover tuition and rent, scraping by until I could afford a tiny studio apartment. It was a grind, balancing classes, shifts at the diner, and the relentless voice in my head that whispered I was a failure. But for the first time, I could breathe, even if the air felt thin. That first year was a blur of late-night study sessions and endless shifts, but it also brought something unexpected: hope. I decided to study chemistry, partly because I loved it, and partly because I wanted to prove to myself, and maybe even to them, that I could excel at something difficult. It wasn't easy. My high school grades had been mediocre, and I felt like I was starting from behind, but for the first time in years, I wasn't crushed under their expectations. I could focus on learning. I still remember my first chemistry exam. I had spent weeks preparing, poring over every formula, every reaction, until I could practically recite them in my sleep. When the professor handed back the graded tests, I hesitated, terrified to look, but there it was, a 92%. I nearly cried right there in the classroom. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I'd earned it. That small victory felt like the first step toward rebuilding myself after everything had fallen apart. Over the years, I evolved in ways I never expected. College wasn't easy, but I learned how to work for what I wanted. The more I gave, the more I grew. By the time I finished my associate's degree, I wasn't just a student anymore. I was someone who had learned how to fight for her place in the world. When I transferred to a 4-year university, the obstacles didn't stop, but I had learned how to face them head-on. The shy, insecure girl who barely scraped by in high school was gone. In her place was someone who could stand in front of a class, explain complex concepts, and hold her own. Chemistry, which had once been a daunting challenge, became my passion. I didn't just want to pass anymore, I wanted to excel, to prove that I wasn't the failure they thought I was. While juggling part-time work, I also interned at local research labs, gaining hands-on experience that eventually led to a life-changing opportunity: becoming a lead researcher at a nonprofit dedicated to advancing science education. It wasn't just a job, it was a mission. I wanted to create a space where other kids, the ones who were told they weren't good enough, could find their way too. Graduating with my bachelor's degree was supposed to be a triumphant moment, but when the day arrived, I realized something painful. My parents hadn't even called, not to congratulate me, not to ask about my plans, nothing. My father, the owner of a massive fertilizer company, had more money than he knew what to do with. He and my mother lived in a mansion, hosted extravagant parties, and rubbed elbows with politicians and CEOs, but for all their wealth, they'd never taken an interest in me unless it was to criticize. Even after I'd graduated with honors, after working tirelessly to get where I was, I didn't exist in their world. To them, I was a reminder of their failure, an inconvenient blemish on their perfect lives. It stung more than I wanted to admit. I had hoped, maybe foolishly, that they'd at least acknowledge my hard work, but they didn't. It was as if I had never mattered to them. That realization hit harder than I expected. The only family member who came to my graduation ceremony was Aunt Lydia, my mother's younger sister. Lydia was the black sheep of the family, shunned for being too eccentric, but she'd always been kind to me. She was the one person who remembered my birthday, even when my parents pretended I didn't exist. When I saw her in the crowd, waving excitedly from the back, a lump formed in my throat. After the ceremony, I found her waiting in the parking lot with a huge bouquet of flowers. "You did it, kid," she said, pulling me into a tight hug. I'm so proud of you. It wasn't much, but it was enough. It wasn't the cold silence I'd grown used to. Aunt Lydia reminded me that family didn't have to mean perfection and that love could come from unexpected places. She didn't care that I hadn't followed the straight path my parents wanted for me. She cared that I'd made it, no matter the hurdles. A few months after graduation, while wrapping up a research project at the university, one of my professors, Dr. Collins, pulled me aside. He was an old-school chemist who spoke about the periodic table like it was poetry. He had noticed my work ethic and persistence. "Rachel," he said, his voice calm and thoughtful, "I've been in touch with some colleagues at Oxford University. They're offering a research opportunity in environmental chemistry, and I think you'd be a perfect fit." At first, I thought he was joking. Oxford? One of the most prestigious universities in the world? Me? But Dr. Collins insisted. "This isn't just a job," he said. "It's a chance to make real contributions to the field. You've earned this. Don't let fear hold you back." His words stayed with me as I filled out the application. I applied hesitantly, not fully believing it could happen. The process was rigorous, and I doubted I'd make the cut. But weeks later, an email arrived. "We are pleased to inform you that you've been awarded a research grant for your proposed work in environmental chemistry at Oxford University." I was stunned. Moving to England felt like stepping into an entirely new world. I didn't tell anyone, not my parents, not my old friends. The only person who knew was Aunt Lydia. A few days before I left for England, I called Aunt Lydia. She was the only person I trusted with the truth. "You've worked too hard to let anything hold you back," she said, her voice steady and encouraging. "Do this for yourself, Rachel." She understood why I needed to disappear, to escape the shadows of my past and carve out a future without the weight of anyone's expectations hanging over me. I asked her not to tell anyone where I was going. I didn't want them to find me, or worse, drag me back into their world of judgment and indifference. So, with nothing but a backpack and a faint hope for a new beginning, I boarded a plane to Oxford. Settling into a tiny flat in the heart of the city, I threw myself into my work. The first few weeks were a blur of adjustment, the language, the culture, the isolation, but as I immersed myself in my research, I began to feel at home. I was part of something bigger now, working on projects that truly mattered, projects with the potential to make a real impact on the world. Chemistry was no longer about proving myself to my parents or anyone else. It was about changing the future. Over time, I completed my master's degree, and the momentum of my research carried me forward. Driven by a newfound confidence, I applied for a PhD. The process was grueling, with sleepless nights and endless hours in the lab, but I was determined. I had found my place at Oxford, and I wasn't turning back. Years later, I earned my doctorate, establishing myself as a respected researcher in the field of environmental chemistry. The culmination of my journey felt surreal, especially when I was offered a position as a professor at the University of Cambridge. Cambridge, one of the world's most prestigious institutions. It felt like a dream I had never dared to chase, not because I didn't think I was capable, but because it seemed too far removed from the girl I had once been. At Cambridge, I found a new passion in teaching and mentoring, guiding the next generation of scientists. Sharing the knowledge and resilience I had gained brought me a sense of fulfillment I hadn't anticipated. Standing at the front of a classroom, commanding respect and attention, I often thought of the shy, uncertain girl I had been. That girl had grown into someone I was proud of. Still, a part of me sometimes glanced over my shoulder, wondering if anyone back home knew where I was, or cared enough to find out. My parents had never reached out, not a single call, letter, or email since I left. It was as though I had been erased from their lives. Did they ever think about me? I told myself it didn't matter. I had built my life without them, and their silence only proved how unnecessary their approval had been. But when I saw my mother in that bathroom mirror, the weight of our history came crashing back. Her dismissive words, "Everyone finds their way eventually," rattled in my mind. Did she really believe that? Did she even care about the years I'd spent clawing my way toward the future I had dreamed of? I thought about all the times they'd told me I wasn't good enough, about the cold silence when I left their house, and the years of absence since. It felt like a lifetime ago, but standing there, the bitterness was as sharp as ever. I had worked so hard, leaving everything behind, moving to England, earning my master's and PhD, becoming a professor at Cambridge, and here she was, treating my accomplishments like an afterthought, like they didn't matter, like I didn't matter. When she walked out of the bathroom, poised and distant, I felt a pang of something between anger and release. Watching her disappear back into the crowd, I realized how far I had come. I didn't need her approval. I didn't need their approval. I had built a life on my own terms, and that was enough. The gala began shortly after. The hum of conversation and the clinking of glasses filled the air as I tried to shake off the weight of our encounter. This was my night, the moment I had worked for, fought for. I took a deep breath and stepped into the ballroom, where my name was called. Rachel Palmer, honored for her groundbreaking contributions to education and sustainable chemistry. The applause was deafening as I walked to the stage. The lights bore down on me, illuminating the sea of well-dressed guests. As I stood there, the gravity of the moment hit me. This wasn't just about my work, it was a declaration to the world, to myself, and to anyone who had doubted me. I had proven that I was more than the girl my parents tried to mold and dismiss. I had become someone entirely my own, and that, above all else, was enough. This was it, the moment where I stood on my own, with nothing to prove to anyone but myself. As I tried to absorb the magnitude of it all, the host's voice rang out, pulling the room's attention. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we have an exciting announcement, the host began, their tone brimming with anticipation. In recognition of tonight's groundbreaking work in education and sustainable chemistry, a generous and anonymous donor has pledged a $2 million grant to the recipient of this award. The room fell silent, and I felt every pair of eyes shift toward me. My heart raced as the words settled over me. $2 million. The sheer weight of the number was surreal, almost too overwhelming to comprehend. This wasn't just recognition, it was a life-changing gesture of trust and belief in someone's potential. But it wasn't mine, at least, not officially, not yet. The host continued, this extraordinary contribution is intended to support the recipient's continued research efforts and to further their impact in education. I blinked, stunned, as the words echoed in the room. The announcement wasn't directly for me, it was for the recipient of the award, whose name had yet to be revealed. Still, the atmosphere shifted, and I couldn't help but notice the charged energy in the air. This wasn't just an award, it was a transformation for whoever received it. As I tried to process everything, my gaze wandered over the crowd, their faces a mixture of anticipation and polite admiration. Then I saw him, near the back, beside the exit. My father stood up abruptly, his face twisted with something that looked like disgust. For a brief moment, our eyes met, then he turned sharply and made his way toward the door, his movements swift and deliberate. He didn't even stay to hear my name. I froze, anger, disbelief, and a sharp pang of bitterness rose in my chest. This was the moment I had dreamed of, validation for everything I'd worked for, an acknowledgement of my journey, and he couldn't even bring himself to remain in the room. The man who had rejected me, kicked me out of his house, and dismissed my dreams was walking away, just as the pinnacle of my success unfolded. The host's voice broke through my thoughts. We are incredibly fortunate to not only have a generous donor for tonight's award, but also a longtime supporter of education and sustainable chemistry. This $2 million grant, made possible by Mosaic Fertilizers, is a testament to the power of innovation and dedication in advancing our field. Mosaic Fertilizers, my father's company. I felt the air leave my lungs as realization struck. The donor funding this grant, the crowning achievement of my career, was tied to the man who had spent years undermining my dreams. The irony was almost too much to bear. He hadn't known it would be me standing on that stage. His contribution had been anonymous, routed through the foundation. He thought he was funding someone else, someone he could be proud of. Instead, it was me. My chest tightened as I tried to keep my composure. The applause around me was deafening, yet it felt distant, like a dull hum pressing against my ears. I stepped forward to the microphone, managing a shaky, "Thank you." The words felt empty, too small for what I was feeling. As the applause faded, I couldn't stay. I turned and walked off the stage, slipping through the crowd and out the back door. My feet moved on instinct, my heart racing. I couldn't let this end like this, not with him walking away from the very moment that should have silenced all his doubts. Pushing open the door to the cool night air, I spotted him standing by his car. His back was to me, shoulders stiff with tension. My feet carried me forward before I could think twice. "Dad," I called, my voice cracking. He didn't turn at first. When he finally did, his expression was bitter, the same look I remembered from all those years ago. "What is it now, Rachel?" His voice was sharp, cold. "You think I'm going to congratulate you? Celebrate the fact that you're taking my money?" I stopped a few feet away, my chest heaving. "I didn't know it came from you," I said evenly, "and I didn't ask for it." He sneered. "No? Well, it's yours now. Enjoy it, but it doesn't change a thing. You're still the failure I kicked out of my house. No grant, no award will fix that." The words hit me like a slap. But this time, they didn't cut as deep. I looked him in the eye, steady and unflinching. I don't need it to. I built my life without you, and I'll keep building it. This grant isn't about you. It's about what I've earned. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, with a dismissive shake of his head, he turned and got into his car. I stood there as he drove away, the sound of the engine fading into the distance. That night, I made a decision. The $2 million grant wasn't my victory. It was a reminder of everything I had left behind. I donated the entire amount, every last cent, to fund scholarships for underprivileged students. They deserved a chance to create their own future, free from the burdens of judgment and expectation. As I pressed the final confirmation on the donation, I felt a quiet sense of peace. My father's money didn't define me. His approval didn't validate me. My legacy would be my own, and that was worth far more than any grant.